And welcome to our council meeting for November the 22nd. As we gather here, and appreciate everybody being in here, except we have Councillor Zelka joining us remotely, but all of us are gathered on the lands in the traditional territories of the Coast and the Straits Salish peoples, and we recognize Lekwungen-speaking peoples known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. We have approval of the agenda first up for November 22nd. Moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded for approval. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. We now move to adoption of the minutes of the November 8th council meeting. Moved and seconded. Any corrections, changes, additions? Not seeing any hands. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries. Mayor's remarks today. I thought I would take, I'm usually very brief, but this is, we're just starting our fourth and final year of this term, and I think it has been both a challenging and rewarding term for this council. I just wanted to express my appreciation to all of our residents in their response to COVID-19, the levels of immunization and just the general courtesy you see in the villages and parks and streets from our residents, I think really speaks positively about our community. Tonight we're considering strategic priorities and preliminary budget options. These are all based on issues that council has raised over the course of the year, and we're trying to tackle those into some of our strategic planning for discussion tonight. For those who are watching, we are just having a discussion for inclusion. The public input on these options will be coming through our budgeting process a little bit later this year and next year. Before we get to that work, I thought I'd just take a minute to talk to the incredibly meaningful but often hidden work done over the last 3 years. If I can use a house analogy, I think we've been doing the hard work of the foundation and not so much of the sort of fun work of doing house, the room renovations and yard work and so forth. But of course all of that work is for naught if the foundation isn't solid. So we're also tackling some more visible issues like housing, but a lot of our fundamentals we're trying to put in really solid shape for the decades to come. Certainly appreciate we've taken a lot of commitment to investments, but that investment should reduce our costs in the long term. I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes to talk to a few of the things that the public might not see as we're doing. For instance, we've done a complete revamp of our procedures and our structures for both council and our advisory bodies. You've seen moved forward timelines for agendas and better tools for public engagement that we continue to refine. The core work of government services, I would say, has benefited from proper records management and other operational best practices that happen behind the scenes that really probably wouldn't be noticed other than the fact that as you make requests for information of our staff, they should be getting back now in minutes or hours instead of days or weeks, which has sometimes been the case of our old systems that we had in place. We've also seen a really wholesale change in our financial planning. Really that commitment to long-term asset management and funding models to drive down our costs long-term. I think you'll see that as the public, and we see it here, as better and more complete financial reporting and accountability both quarterly and annually. And I think it's also important to note we've adopted as council those key metrics in our annual report so that our trends can be tracked over time and are consistent over time. The last on this, I just want to say we've seen significantly increased investment in our capital maintenance and replacement work. The maintenance is equally important as the replacement to kind of keep down our breakages. We're also, of course, working to create a proper asset management plan based on those condition assessments and maintenance to prevent future failures. There's a lot I'd like to talk about, but I'm not going to. But I just want to. We have a lot of work to do tonight. I just thought I would take this moment, 3 years in, to say thank you to council for being willing to tackle those unglamorous issues head on. It's not easy to do, but also to staff who've taken our direction with enthusiasm and professional excellence. And I think what I've seen is they've taken all the challenges of the last 20 months and turned them into opportunities, really looking to improve our operations and processes. So I can say honestly that I'm very honored to work with this council and with the staff, and appreciate everything that everybody does. Before I move on, I want to just, two short reminders or information. One, we have recruitment open for advisory bodies. So anybody who's interested in joining any of our advisory bodies, that is now open. And if you're interested, please do apply. And also, we are having a town hall. This is something we started to do before COVID. We did it, excuse me, in person back then. We're going to do it through Zoom. So on December 9th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., we're completely open to all residents of Oak Bay. We'll make ourselves available as a council to talk to you and answer questions and just have a dialogue about the future of the community. So again, December 9th, 6 to 8 p.m. Look forward to seeing you all there. That concludes my comments, so thank you for that. A little bit longer than usual. Moving on to item number 5.1, we have Mr. Weber to introduce 3050 Beach Drive, and we have the representative for the applicant as well. Welcome, Mr. Weber.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The District of Oak Bay is in receipt of a combined upland siting and design application and development variance permit application to undertake renovations to an existing single-family home located at 3050 Beach Drive. Staff have reviewed the proposal in context with the relevant official community plan policies on the overall site design and consider the proposal to be supportable and ready for council consideration. The subject property is located on the west side of Beach Drive at the northwest corner of the intersection of Beach Drive and Valdez Place. It is approximately 1,972 meters squared in area, surrounded by single-family homes on all sides, and has an RS2 one-family residential use zoning designation and Uplands OCP designation. The proposal involves constructing 2 new bedrooms with attached bathrooms, as well as a laundry room on the second story of the residence, constructing a flat roof overhang over the garage bay doors, constructing a flat roof with 2 skylights over top an existing raised patio at the rear of the residence. To construct one of the proposed bedroom additions that is to be located on the second story of the residence above the existing garage, a variance to the minimum required rear lot line setback regulation within the district zoning bylaw is required. Specifically, the minimum required rear lot line setback is being requested to be relaxed from 7.62 meters to 6.10 meters, a difference of 1.52 meters. I should note that the home already has 2 separate variance applications approved to relax the rear lot line setback regulation for additions to the first story of the residence. While the outer wall of the proposed second story addition is proposed to be built in line with the wall of the first story additions that were built below it, and would not reduce the existing rear lot line setback further than the present condition, it would add additional floor area on the second story within the required rear lot line setback area, thereby requiring a variance. No trees are proposed to be removed or planted as part of the proposal, and the existing 57% tree canopy cover already exceeds the 45% canopy coverage target for the zone required by the tree protection bylaw. The application was reviewed at the November 2nd, 2021 Advisory Design Panel meeting, and the panel noted that the design is consistent with the existing building and confirmed that the new look covered patio does not add to the permitted lot coverage. And subsequently, they recommended that council consider the approval of both upland siting design and development variance permit applications as presented. As the subject property is within an area designated as the uplands within the district's official community plan, staff further reviewed the proposal for conformance with the upland siting design guidelines. Staff determined that the proposal is in keeping with the existing architectural style of the home and with the siting, massing, and character of other homes in the area. Furthermore, the proposed second story addition is not anticipated to have significant impacts to views and shadowing or create overlook and privacy issues due to the existing mature trees and landscaping surrounding the property, which are to be maintained. Therefore, staff consider the proposed development to be supportable. Should council wish to move forward with authorizing the development variance permit, notification to adjacent property owners would be undertaken in accordance with the land use procedures bylaw, and both the subject upland siting and design and development variance permit applications will be returned to council for consideration at a later date. I believe the applicant, Russ Collins, is here today to speak to the application as well, as you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I'm going to go to, if there's any questions of the applicant or staff, I'll take those first. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks. I just, on the staff report on page, sorry, my iPad is acting up here. On page 2, under background historic context, it does talk a little bit about a siting error that happened in 2016. So it says an additional development variance permit was issued in 2016 to further reduce the rear lot line setback to 5.83 meters due to a siting error. And I'm just wondering if we have any additional information on that, because I'd be interested to know how that turned out. Obviously, it must have been passed.
Mr. Weber, do you have any additional information about that, that citing error that resulted in that change of variance?
Yes, thank you. So basically what happened is council originally approved a development variance permit to allow the first story addition to be sited within the required rear lot line setback. And I believe during the building permit stage, it was found out that the addition had actually been sited closer to the rear lot line setback, or closer to the rear lot line than the original variance allowed. So a subsequent development variance permit application was pursued by the applicant and was approved by council as well.
Any other questions, Councillor Braithwaite? Any other questions of the applicant? I don't see any here. So I'll just seek a motion then at this point. Move, Councillor Green?
Yes, I'll move recommendation 1 that this go to notice.
To notification for neighbors.
Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Seconded, thank you. Any other discussion? I'll just make a comment. I think on the face of it, the design is very, very appropriate for the building, and I actually really appreciated the design and variance rationale report that was provided by the applicant as well. I found that it was helpful in terms of understanding the context for the changes requested and the design thought that went into it. So thank you for including that as well. I found that very helpful. So I don't see any other discussion. Mr. Collins, I think you're off the hook tonight as we move this forward. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. So that'll go out for notification to neighbors and come back here in probably a little over 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to
Your Worship, do we need to receive the
Oh,
report?
we should, yes, we should receive the report here tonight as well.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, thank you. Moving on to item number 6.1, decidedly more complicated than the last one. I will, I just thank you, Ms. Bay, for being here this evening, and for the information of members of council. We have most of the leadership team attending as well remotely, so if there's specific questions attached to perhaps staff requirements or staff input on those various items, they will be here as well to answer those questions. But without further ado, I think what we'll just procedurally, what I was thinking of doing was we'll walk through this and talk to the individual items, and then we'll have we'll deal with it essentially as motions for each individual piece at the end, and move it forward in that way. So there's a bit of clarity of direction. But to start with, we'll go through them and allow discussions to happen a bit more organically. So with that, Ms. Bay, I understand you have a brief presentation. So welcome to them. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. When council was first elected, you set 5 high-level priorities for your term, and you selected projects to advance those 5 priorities. And those projects are listed in the council priority plan, which finds its home now on our website, so it's easily accessible for the public as well. Staff report on those priority projects and the progress on them twice a year at Q2 and Q3, and the last update on that was provided to council at the end of September. So each year, council has a chance to add, delete, or change projects as you see fit. Council's annual review allows the district to respond to ever-changing needs and aspirations from the community, and that review is happening tonight. Council's annual review is part of a cycle of planning, resourcing, and implementation that has been continually tweaked to better support alignment between the public input, council decisions, and staff implementation. So this is a lot of the foundational work that Mayor was referencing earlier on, in terms of it may not be particularly prominent, but certainly very critical to the ongoing success of what we do. So I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about how that process plays out in Oak Bay, because there's a lot of moving parts to it. And so here you see on the slide a fairly complex array of intertwined pieces. I'll just walk through it and explain how these pieces connect. So there's there's the public component that provides the.
Excuse me, sorry, Ms. Bay, just on the Zoom, we're not seeing that. We're just seeing the presentation without, it's still in non-presentation mode. It's still in the. Just want to make sure people watching on Zoom are watching looking at the same slides as we are in the room here. There we go.
There we go, thank you.
But now we can't read it in the room. Is there a way to have that full screen and this full screen?
Not that I'm aware of. He's listening.
Oh, so that's interesting. So if you put it on full screen, then it shows up here, but in presentation mode over there, because you have a external monitor, I'm assuming. Okay. Yes. Interesting. Can you flip that around the other way so you make, oh, I guess you can't because one's the presentation piece. I don't think there's any way of doing it given that we're using one computer for both in this case. The only thing I might suggest is that you change the monitor to share the same image on both screens, which may require our helpful IT attendant to come in and do that.
You can share yours.
Yeah, that's the right screen you're in.
Okay, if you want to do that. So Daniela's going to share hers on Zoom. I will share mine. Yeah, so it doesn't recognize them as separate monitors. I will share mine back in.
Sorry for this. For those watching at home, we're just trying to make this in a way that allows us to see it full screen in our room, and those of you watching at home to see it full screen. That is now working. So we've got a little bit of a manual override. So yes, let's move on to the next slide, Ms. Bay, and then then you'll just follow along with that online. Thank you very much. That works. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. So getting back to the slide, there's this illustration is to show how the public feedback ties into the decisions that council is making, and how that in turn translates into action that's directed for staff. So you'll see 3 columns there. It all starts and ends really with the public input. And so at the outset, we have the public input feeding into documents such as the official community plan, and of course also into the input that, or the decisions that you make at the outset of your term in setting the priorities. And so that particular part is based on what you hear at the doorstep and when you're campaigning, and then you come in as a brand new council and you set some priorities for your 4-year term. Recognizing that 4 years is a long time, you review those priorities on an annual basis, so then you move on to the new council priorities piece. And that, of course, is informed also by public input, so public input obtained through the budget questionnaires. And so when we hear new ideas and you hear new ideas from the public through that annual review, then we provide the backgrounders that are, and this is a new piece, so all those parts of this illustration that are illustrated with a little dashed line around it are new pieces. So the first couple of years we really focused on tightening up the part that was council, and this past year we've really focused on that orange column there under the staff piece and trying to get some of those pieces solidified. So you'll see with your packages this year that we have a new document called Backgrounders, and it's provided for each of the new initiatives that you've suggested that we have a look at over the course of this term. And that's really intended to help support your decision making tonight. And then once you get those backgrounders and you provide direction tonight, then whatever you provide direction on will feed into the budget process. And that budget process in itself will be informed by public input. So there'll be committee of the whole meetings that will allow the public to provide input on those budget items. And then once you provide the budget for our operating items, that gets translated into documents that we call work plans. For all of staff, we're now preparing work plans for each of our departments that detail where the hours that we have available will be spent. And so part of those hours go to the operations of the organization, keeping the roads cleared if it snows, making sure that our parks are maintained in good fashion, overseeing rental properties, those kinds of things all happen within our ongoing operations. And then also the items that you talk about tonight, if they actually get funded through the budget process, then those will show up in the council priorities plan. And once they're in the council priority plan, we as staff commit to completing project charters before we actually start the work on those. So any new work that gets started from items that are projects in your council priority plan, we will prepare a project charter on it. If there's a communications component to it, we'll also be preparing a communications plan. And those key pieces of the project charter and the communications plan that have a governance component to it will come back to you for a governance review. So in essence, we're not going to really start work on your projects even once you've funded them until you've provided us with detailed direction on how those projects are to proceed. So at that point, we get into implementation mode, and then we report out on our progress on that implementation at our quarterly updates, the Q2 and the Q3 updates, as well as through our annual report. And that's how the public is informed on progress. So you see, it kind of starts and ends with the public, and it really represents those three stages of our planning cycle, kind of the aspirational part at the beginning, your council priorities, the OCP, and then the alignment process, which happens through the budget, the council priority plan, and your governance review, and then finally the achievement phase, which is celebrating the successes as the work is complete. As just explained, Council's review of priority projects occurs following public feedback obtained through the budget questionnaire. And so what we've been doing is running budget questionnaires, and the proposal is to do those in years 1, 2, and 3 of your mandate. In year 4 of your mandate, the equivalent of what the information that we get through the budget questionnaire happens through your campaigning. And so that would be new information that you bring to the table subsequent to an election, would then inform the council priorities in the year 4/year 1. The report before you does convey feedback that we received from this year's budget questionnaire, and I'll note that those results are also posted on the district's website now, as well as the online engagement platform. And so everything that's attached to your report relating to the budget questionnaire is also online now, as well as the raw Excel data. So I just thought I'd spend a few minutes just talking about the summary of the budget questionnaire. The super concise version of it is that of the services that we asked about, 27 services received strong support for being maintained as they're currently being provided. One service received strong support for being decreased, and the threshold I used for strong support was 40%, just because that seemed to be where things cut. And 3 services received strong support for being increased, mitigate and adapt to climate change, manage deer population, and develop additional and new land use policies. With respect to the feedback on council priorities, the next slide, residents agreed with council's priorities, and for most priorities felt that enough was being done by the district. When asked about diverse housing, most residents agreed with it being a priority, but wished that more would be done by the district. So that was the one council priority where there's a desire for more. So through 2021, council and councillors have identified projects that you wish to consider tonight, and you've provided this feedback either through council meetings, council resolutions, or through individual feedback that's been conveyed to staff. And that feedback has resulted in staff preparing the backgrounders that are attached to your reports. And the purpose of those backgrounders is really to provide you with information on potential timing anticipated cost, and expected impact on staff time of taking on those new projects. The estimated budget and time impacts are detailed in the backgrounders attached to your report, specifically attachments 5 and 6. And staff really hope that this new tool will provide council with what you need to decide how to direct staff. So I've got available on this slide presentation a list of the backgrounders that are attached to your reports, and I can come back to these slides later in the presentation when you're ready to discuss these. These are intended to support your discussion tonight. And just a quick comment that council's of course not limited to these items. If you have other ideas for new projects, that's absolutely fair game. If you direct new projects, we can provide information on cost to action that new work through the budget process. Having staff report back on the resources needed to take on new initiatives would be consistent with council's commitment to Ms. Varela, our CAO. That commitment was that our CAO be given the opportunity to identify resource impacts prior to staff being directed to implement new work. Selection of projects and timing and the scope of the projects is of course a council governance decision. It is noted that staff are fully committed to delivering on operational activities and previously identified projects. So to free up capacity, you can really break it down to there's 4 options for freeing up capacity. You could change the project scope of projects that are already underway up to and including canceling projects. You can approve budgets to hire consultants or staff or a combination thereof. Or you could lower operational service levels, so we're spending less work doing the basics. Or you can delay some projects to make room for others to happen more quickly. So it's kind of a mix and match approach, and some of those may be suitable for in some cases, and others responses suitable in other cases. So it's really up to you to determine the most appropriate path forward. And then staff will, of course, implement per council's direction. So my next slide regards next steps. So through the 2022 budget process, staff will identify the financial implications associated with whatever you direct us to do tonight, and we'll do so in the context of the district's full budget. So what you have tonight is financial implications of individual initiatives, but depending on how all those shake out and which ones you pick, in which order, and which departments those fall to, the impacts may be a little bit different. So we've done our best with those initiative backgrounders to give you a sense of what that might look like, but it might need tweaking as we move forward following your direction. So this next step slide shows the budget process is happening in February. Once we get direction from that, we will, as cited earlier, prepare work plans. And then whatever council priority initiatives you fund through the budget process will make their way into the council priority plan, and that document will be updated in June or July. And as noted earlier, that will generate project charters that will come back to you for governance review before we start projects. And then that will ultimately lead to implementation on the part of staff, and that's what will get the ball rolling for next steps. So, Your Worship, with that, that concludes my introduction. As mentioned earlier, staff are here to answer any questions you may have with respect to the individual backgrounders.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bay. I'm quite happy just to walk through those items in Appendix 5, or Attachment 5, just one by one, and we can just sort of talk to them. And I think that's probably the simplest way of going through it. And if there's any additional initiatives that aren't captured there that perhaps you've thought about or we've talked about, they didn't feel was captured in this, then we can have that. And then we'll come back, and I think we'll just walk through it and take motions at that point to walk through them one by one. But I think we need to talk about the whole before we get to the bottom. Councillor Patterson, you had a question before we begin?
I do. Thank you very much, Mayor. I just would like to clarify the uses of the terms council priorities and council initiatives. As I look at the documents and even what we produce on our agendas every week, the priorities, in fact, are set, and were set at the beginning of the term. And so those priorities are already established. And what we are actually talking about is council initiative, not staff initiative towards working towards those objectives of those priorities. Is that correct?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. That's correct. That when we refer to the priorities, it's those 5 high-level priorities that Council identified at the outset of the mandate, and then the Council Priorities Plan is really a list of initiatives that are intended to deliver on Council's 5 priorities.
And so going further with that, with the survey itself that was sent out, the questionnaire, and thank you very much, Ms. Bay, for this report. That there's a lot of information here, but on the questionnaire then, so the survey that went out is actually about strictly council initiatives that to achieve the goals of the priorities. Is that how they were done? Is that how the survey was done?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I'm not sure it's ever quite that clear cut because there's obviously items in there that aren't directed at these meetings but might fall out of the general priorities given. So, Ms. Bay.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. There are 2 basic components to the budget questionnaire. One asked about existing service levels, which are more or less our operations. So it asked about what do you feel about the way we maintain our streets, about the number of sidewalks, those kind of high-level questions that really are more operational. And then a portion of the budget questionnaire also related to the Council's 5 priorities. And with those 5 priorities, we referred respondents to the Council Priority Plan that listed the individual initiatives that delivered on Council's 5 priorities. So we didn't ask specifically about individual initiatives in Council's priority plan in the budget questionnaire. We focused on the 5 high-level priorities.
Thank you, Ms. Bay. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor, for that information. The last question that I have for staff is on the survey that was sent out. Could you remind me what percentage of the population, residents in the community, responded? Do we have that data?
Your Worship, we have just shy of 20,000 people, and we got 280 responses. So it's a low number as a percentage of the overall population for sure. It's slightly down from last year, I believe by about 40 from where we were at last year. I think there's a lot of pandemic fatigue going on. I will note that there are some age groups, as reflected in the summary that I've attached to the report, that were better represented than others. So certainly I don't think it can be taken to be statistical. Well, I know it can't be taken to be statistically significant either in terms of the numbers that we got back or in how it's representing the population. But it is an indication of how those who've chosen to respond to the survey feel about where things are at.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important for, well, certainly for members of council, maybe not for the members of the public, to read the comments because often the nuances are in those more thoughtful sort of responses. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I take that advice. I must admit I have not had the opportunity yet to read all of the nuanced comments that are in the report, so that's the reason for my clarifications on all of this. But I do appreciate just the clarifications that have been provided. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Zelka, you had some questions to start with. Go ahead.
Yes, I do. One of the advantages of being at home and attending via Zoom is that I get to see a little bit of what the public sees. I cannot find the presentation that was just shown on Zoom. And when I go through YouTube, I can't see it there, and I also can't see it online through the okbay.civicweb.net. Is this presentation available somewhere? The one that staff so ably presented, but no one, unfortunately, the public was not able to see?
I don't think it is, but Ms. Bay?
Your Worship, if I may defer to the Corporate Services
Sure.
Director.
Ms. Williams, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. The presentation isn't attached to the agenda presently, but we will upload it tomorrow as a part of an amended agenda. And as is typical in our meetings where we have a hybrid, a presentation that's shown on the screen here will not be captured on the live stream because the live stream is being captured off the council table. so the public are not able to watch it unless they're participating on Zoom, but they'll certainly be able to pick it up tomorrow.
Oh, if I may continue, please.
Please do, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much, Chair. So yes, thank you for that. I very much appreciate and the presentation. I look forward to seeing it tomorrow so that I can, I guess after voting, find out have a better idea of exactly what I'm voting on. So, so with respect to that, I'm just going through the actual wording of some of the recommendations. I just need a bit of understanding of what we're going to be talking about in a few moments. I understand what used to be called the corporate plan has now been renamed as the council priorities plan. I just want to start with that.
Sure. Ms. Bay, perhaps you can just give a quick overview of those terminologies.
Thank you, Your Worship. That is correct. What was formerly the corporate plan was renamed with Council's blessing to the Council Priority Plan to better reflect the content of the document.
Thank you very much. I had to go to page 9 of the corporate, the priorities plan to kind of get that in the small print there. Thank you so much. And what I understand that we're going to be going through is not really the additional initiatives, but we're going to basically just be reaffirming the 5 fundamental priorities. Is that really all that staff is asking us to do today when I look at the actual recommended motion?
So, Councillor Zelka, the motions, the process that we're going to undertake is just, the first part is just to reaffirm. So if there's any changes that Council wishes to see in those fundamental priorities, then we'll deal with that. I don't anticipate we'll have significant change in that in the last year, but we can have that discussion if a member of Council wishes.
Okay.
And the second part of it is the attachment 5 and 6, which has the details. We're going to walk through each of those items on attachment 5. That have been brought forward by Council for consideration and those are the new initiatives for consideration for inclusion in the budget. And those documents in attachment 6 include all of the staff input in terms of the time and cost impacts of that with some of the backgrounder for it. So those are the things that we're walking through in more detail, is the new initiatives.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for just clarifying exactly what we're doing today. Now, the public does not have an opportunity to have input here, but I understand at a future time, I guess after we finalize our list, then they can have input. I just wanted to know, when will the public have input on the new initiatives, please?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Ms. Bay, do you want to talk to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be happy to speak to that. The intent here is that Council tonight is essentially providing direction for what staff are to bring forward as part of the budget documents. And then once they're in the budget documents as part of the consideration of the budget, there will be opportunity through a committee of the whole for the public to provide comments. At that point, we will have things fully costed out, and that's the point at which the complete package of in terms of the impacts of the initiatives will be known.
Is that helpful?
Excellent. That is very helpful. I appreciate that just taking a few moments to walk through the structure of what we're doing today and also the new terminology. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Zelka. I appreciate that. I do want to point out, if anybody came late and was wondering what was in that presentation, that will inform it. It was really essentially a backgrounder in terms of our structures of how we get to this point in the reporting structure and input structure. So those pieces, but in terms of the actual materials that we're going to be talking to today, that was not included in that presentation. That's really what we have the attachments for. So I hope that helps clarify. So with that, not seeing any other, Councillor Patterson, do you wish to add something else?
A question about something on the sheet. Like I know in the priorities that are set, one of them is providing service excellence, and the way that is done is optimizing operational effectiveness and fostering public engagement. Operational effectiveness is not quite Council's responsibility, but certainly fostering the public engagement is. And I notice there is nothing in the new priorities under that category, and that build First Nations relations is under health and resilience. And I'm not quite understanding that categorization, so perhaps an explanation would help.
Why don't we just talk to that when we come to that item in the list? Okay, so I think with that, I'll kick into the, I would suggest you go to attachment 5, where they're all on one single page to talk to. We have first up under sustainability service, maybe Ms. Bay, do you want to introduce these, or should I go to the director responsible? What do you think the best way of doing this is?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have material prepared for each of these individually, so probably the best sources of information would be the directors that prepared these. And the department names are noted next to each of the individual items.
I think this one, I mean, it was an initiative that was approved by council essentially and then deferred until we had more information. So it probably doesn't need an awful lot of review at this point. So I think I might leave this one to questions of council, of staff, or comments. And if there's not much, then we can move forward with the piece. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I actually have a question on, and thank you very much for all the material and the report and the presentation. Thank you very much, Ms. Bay. Through you, Mayor. I just have a question on the face page of Ms. Bay's report, staff report, under number 3, under notes on that face page. I just wanted to ask for clarity. Item number 3, which is council is not limited to new initiatives listed in attachments 5 and 6, but is reminded of the council endorsed protocol for new initiatives, which stipulates that prior to any final decision motion being made by council to undertake a proposed new special project or initiative, the CAO be given, Chief Administrative Officer, be given the opportunity to formally report back to council if deemed warranted by the Chief Administrative Officer. I wasn't clear about what that statement meant, if deemed warranted by the Chief Administrative Officer. Could I just get, through you, Mayor, and to Ms. Varela, just clarity on that particular phrase? Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Green. Is Ms. Varela, are you available to address the question?
Absolutely, Your Worship. Thank you for the opportunity. So this was actually a practice put into play before I actually assumed the role of Chief Administrative Officer, but it is a very practical one in terms of there's only so much a defined amount of staff time available. So we can calculate how much staff you have, how many hours. We're now doing a detailed level of work plan that actually lets us assume that in the context of how much work is required. So if there was something that council put forward that we thought we could achieve within our operational hours, certainly council saw a lot of progress on those 56 recommendations that came out of the previous mayor's task force on public engagement. A lot of those were handled at the operational level. A couple required additional budget. So it's just making that determination at the administration level to see what is required to achieve council's direction.
Councillor Green?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm going to give Mr. Haran a chance just to discuss this item if he wishes. If not, I'm happy to move on to the next piece. Mr. Haran, did you wish to talk to this opening item here? I'm not getting any questions at this point. I think it seemed to be fairly straightforward in terms of the guidance.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity. I think I will just say a quick word. The backgrounders and the information is complete and covers the bases. But one thing I just wanted to mention at this time was to say that in the last few years, as we've expanded the work that's happening around infrastructure renewal and operations and maintenance, and really just seeking out ways to maximize the use of the folks that we have and the resources that are available to us, we continue to run into trying to figure out ideas or how do we do more with less. At this stage of the game, we're realizing that in terms of collecting data about the maintenance we're doing, in terms of planning for the future, in terms of more effectively and efficiently taking in the information about what's happening out in the field and turning that into real work, a computerized electronic asset management, maintenance management system is really the best way for us to do that. So we're preparing now to to start down that path to gain those efficiencies going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huron. I don't see any other questions, so I'll just move on to item number B, which is the Community Energy Plan. Came out of a presentation we had with Mr. Olson. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I know that it does say in here that it would be a consultant that we would be hiring, and I'm wondering if that's something that would fall on Mr. Olson, or would that have to go out to tender for different consultants? Because I know that Mr. Olson obviously knows Oak Bay inside and out and has done a good job for us so far on this.
Yes, he has, and I think he also indicated he wishes to to complete his retirement at some point. Ms. Bay, do you have an answer for the process attached to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly imagine that Mr. Olson would be part of the discussion if Council were to choose to pursue this. The approach of not listing him individually was in part because of course, procurement practices and so forth, and also having listened to Council's discussion the other day and to Mr. Olson's responses, we were anticipating that might not even be a possibility.
Thank you, Ms. Bay. Any other questions on this? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I'd appreciate this being included. I was just wondering there is not recognizing that there is not a great deal of direct dialogue between our staff and CRD staff on climate initiatives, that there's limited sort of ability to interface with that dialogue. I guess, not to sound blunt, but what, in staff's opinion, would this plan and this reporting give us to inform district operations that would be beyond the energy planning and some of the reporting documents that would be coming out of the CRD?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. As I understood it, and this is really Council's initiative and Council's scope, so whatever Council wants it to be is what it can be. We tried to put together the best we could based on the discussion we heard the other day, knowing that Council wanted at least to have this discussion. So I will preface it's completely up to Council what this does. As I see it, the CRD work is at a highly regional level, and if Council wanted something that was more specific to Oak Bay, then that is something that the district would likely have to undertake on its own accord. So if it's just a high-level conceptual, what can be done? Well, that work is already out there. It doesn't necessarily need to be tailored to Oak Bay specifically. We know what the points are that need to be moved, but if the desire on Council's part is to know what specifically can be done in Oak Bay and how that would roll out, then further work would be needed.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly in follow-up, I would be supported, granted that this initiative could take a number of different forms, but I'm supportive of the idea of developing tools for the community. We've had a lot of success with district operations, and not to set those aside, but developing tools for the community and providing practical information for the community, especially around housing and upgrades to housing, improvements to housing, and energy efficiency in that. That's something that we've not put resources towards in the past and need to have some capacity to do, and was clearly something that the Community Climate Action Work Group raised as a priority. So in terms of how we improve, upgrade, and incentivize energy efficiency, especially in the housing sector, that's where I would like to see some of the focus of this go to.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I'm going to go to first-time speakers first, Councillor Green, and then back to Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And just adding to Councillor Appleton's comments and Councillor Braithwaite's, it's clear that local governments are really back on their heels in terms of preparing for climate change and climate action. So I think this is a really good point, that anything we can do at the local level to both educate and inform our community and ourselves on what we need to do to be more leading edge, I think, is important. So I think wherever possible, I think that's going to become a more pressing issue as time goes on, and local governments are going to have to prepare, and I think they're not that well prepared right now, and they know that. So I see this as a huge priority going forward for all municipal governments. Thank you.
Thank you. I think just those clarifications are definitely going to be required, because I think the original thing with Olson Consulting was the direct energy efficiencies and carbon reduction of the district's operations, and the other pieces I think are important, and if they're included, it might change the scope of the work required. Councillor Braithwaite, you have.
Just a question on the funding source column, because I see that sometimes it says reserves, which I totally understand. Sometimes it says taxation or surplus. So is it that we have the choice between taxation or surplus, or if there is a surplus, that it can be taken out of that prior to it being taken out of taxation?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to defer to the Director of Finance on that, as that's within his bailiwick.
Fair enough. You're in the room, so it's so easy to go directly to you. Mr. Payne, and for those watching at home, this is Christopher Payne, our Director of Finance here in Oak Bay. Welcome, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Your Worship. An excellent question. And the reason why some of these initiatives showed the choice of taxation or surplus is because the funding source really is contingent on what council's plan are with that initiative for the long term. If an initiative is a one-time initiative, has a beginning and an end, staff normally recommend surplus funding or reserve funding, because that's a finite funding source. However, if some of these initiatives evolve into an ongoing service or an ongoing operating item, taxation has to be or utilities has to be the funding source.
Thank you. And then also for something like this, I would imagine that all possibilities of grants would be pursued as well if something like this were to go forward. So that could cut down then in up to however much, maybe half perhaps, from where that money, or how much money that would take from taxation or surplus.
Mr. Payne, you can comment if you wish.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and especially this type of initiative, there are many grant opportunities.
Thank you. I have Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I very much appreciate being able to speak to this initiative. I'm very much in favor of it. I was most taken with Mr. Olson's presentation a few weeks ago, and I do note, with respect to that presentation, that it was much of the work that was done on that program, as documented in the sustainability and report section on the oakbay.ca website. There are reports there going all the way back to, it looks like 2008 even, with 2012, with reports related to specifically to the CARIP, or the the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program. And that funding or granting program, I understand, provided Oak Bay a few thousands of dollars every year, that in some ways provided us the incentive to actually look at our carbon reductions within the district, and resulted in some incredible work done by in particular, the Parks, Rec, and Culture part of the District of Oak Bay. And as we saw in the presentation a few weeks ago, an incredible amount of not only money saved, but also greenhouse gas reductions achieved within the district. Also basically proving out the point that if we can do it, frankly, the citizens can do it. So we've actually proven that by becoming literally carbon neutral. I understand that's been just for a couple of years now. So as a result of the Climate Action Revenue Incentive Program being canceled by the current NDP government, it was a liberal program under the previous government, and with no potential replacement for that to incentivize us and other local authorities to continue the internal work to reduce our energy usage and greenhouse gas extension. That's where I believe this initiative is to fill the gap, to continue the work put forward by Mr. Olson, but also ideally extend it beyond not just the Parks, Rec, and Culture area to being literally district-wide. Now, I just wanted to confirm with staff that is the intention, that it really is district focused. I mean, if the public would like to use this as an example, that's fine, but is the intention being put forward here is to be district focused, yes or no?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. We've noted that the plan would address both district operations as well as opportunities to decrease community housing and transportation energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. So it will be twofold. I will note there that this is the plan. It's not implementation. So any recommendations that would require additional funds would be a separate project. So obviously for 100,000, we're not talking about incentives, for example, for the community to do work.
Thank you. That's very helpful to hear that the suggestion of what's being proposed here is actually twofold. I thought it was only one-fold with respect to the district operations. You know, our task force group has reported out, and we do have a number of initiatives already going forward, and I do look forward to funding those further that are citizen-focused. I was really hoping that this initiative would be more fundamentally district-focused. So the next question I will have is where does the $100,000 come from? So before I get to an answer on that, what I'd like to ask through you, Chair, to maybe Director of Finance, is how much money did we receive through the CARE program, generally speaking, year after year? I was under the impression it was around 25,000, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Just for clarification, the funding source options there are either through taxation, or if it's a one-time funding initiative, then it could be from surplus. And I think, Mr. Payne, it would be very helpful for us to understand the impacts of the changes to the CARET program.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. To answer your question about the amount of funding, it varied between about $30,000 and $35,000 annually. Those funds were directed towards our climate action reserve. The current balance being around $230,000, and the current only projects that are funded from that reserve are the Community Climate Action Working Group projects, which commits about $100,000 in there. So in terms of the impact of CARET being canceled, we don't have a sustainable annual funding source for that. Council can choose to raise taxes to commit the annual funds to our reserve. That's a question that will be asked during budget. Or staff will keep an eye out for grant programs. There are many grant programs around this particular topic. They're not sustainable ongoing commitments from senior levels of government, but there are programs available for projects such as this.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So the funding that we received previously through a granting funding was $30,000 to $35,000 per year, and that's what Mr. Olson and staff used to come up with all that incredible work, I understand, over the years, year after year, since at least 2012 up until 2020, to make us carbon neutral, at least the district. Is that correct?
I think it was more than just the CARET funding, Councillor Zelka. There was funding from all different mechanisms. The change that happened around 2013, as by my recollection predates Mr. Payne, was that we applied for, following some good advice from the District of Saanich staff, we changed our application, which sort of said, rather than giving the carbon tax back to the province, we were allowed to keep it ourselves and use it for funds that would be incremental increases to carbon reduction initiatives. And that's where that $35,000 a year approximately came from. But there was significantly more funding than just that went into those initiatives that Mr. Olson and the whole district has implemented. So I can answer that part of the question.
Thank you for clarifying that. When I look at the CARE granting funding, it talks about how the local authority would get their funding returned, having to do with the carbon tax and those sorts of things. So that was really my initial question. Maybe I'll ask it one last time. How much money did we get under the CARE program year after year, or maybe in 2019, 2018?
Mr. Payne, do you have the exact numbers?
Your Worship, between $30,000 and $35,000 per year.
Was the money that was given to us by the provincial government as a grant?
Through your worship, yes, we would have the CAREP reporting done, which measured how many carbon taxes we paid through the year. Those
Excellent.
carbon taxes were returned to us in the form of a grant, and they were about between $30,000 and $35,000 per year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. And that's what I loved about the CARE program. Not only did it provide an incredible reserve fund that we can now use for other purposes, but it also gave us the incentive to move forward with the Olson, the work being put forward by Mr. Olson. So how do I say, in 2019, the district put forward a strategic energy management plan that was district focused, it appears to me. And I got the impression from Mr. Olson's presentation was that whole process with his retirement is ending. And that's really what I would like to see continuing. And I was hoping that either from this Climate Action Reserve Fund or something in the range of $30,000 to $35,000 per year, not really $100,000 per year, that we could continue that work going forward district-wide. Is this something that staff was hoping would be expanded beyond what was already being done by Mr. Olson, or is there something else being intended for that extra? By my calculation, $65,000 extra beyond the $35K.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I think this is an estimate, but go ahead, Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. It was really put together with the thought that if council wanted both a district focus as well as a community focus, that would require additional funds. If council just wanted to look at the district operations, that would be a lesser amount. I'll also just add that if council were to choose to go ahead with this initiative, just like with any of the other initiative backgrounders, staff would, once the project is funded, come back with a detailed project charter, or at least the governance aspects of the project charter for council direction and check-in as to the exact scope of the project. So the precise scope, other than influencing the budget, doesn't necessarily need to be nailed down tonight.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Behan. That's a good point, as we do have a lot of items to get through, so we should probably try and go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Absolutely agree. But what helped was to break down this into two items. The part that was Mr. Olson did, plus some additional item that I guess really was started by the Climate Task Force. So I definitely would be in support of this. I worry the $100,000 is too much, and it might not get full support by council. But if it was only $50,000, would we be able to at least continue some of the district operations? Would be my final question, and then I'll release the floor. I'll yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne, is that a reasonable assessment that we could, if just internal 50,000, external included 100,000? Is that I know we're just sort of guessing at this point, but is that a reasonable estimate?
Your Worship, my sense is that the work that can be done here is scalable. So if council sets an upper limit to that, we would prepare a project charter and tell you what can be achieved for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Patterson. Oh, sorry, I had Councillor Ney first. My apologies. Councillor Ney and then Patterson.
On the face of this, I really like the idea of this community energy plan. I think it's really needed, and for us to move forward in some sort of logical, planful way, obviously, such as what a plan can render us. But and I do have to comment on the work. I think we're all aware of this at this council table, but that we set a target in 2007 of reducing gas emissions in the district from to 33% in 2007. And it's very rare you see to exceed to 43% reduction in emissions. And I do appreciate those are corporate reductions and primarily through the rec center, but it really does speak to the ableness of Mr. Olson. So I'm pleased to see that he's doing this. I guess my comments really on this, should council decide to move this forward, and I hope we do, because I think it will help us to develop metrics and benchmarks that I think are useful to reinforce and motivate and guide our work here at this table and with our community. And I guess my comment, Mr. Mayor, is really just, it seems to me, since a lot of the work that's being suggested here will be around reducing GHGs with housing and transportation, which I fully support at this stage. To the degree to which the work will engage our existing climate action advisory, or whatever we're calling it, commission or committee, I guess it is, and our community at large as this plan is developed. I guess it's a question. Is that part of? I would presume it is, given our you know.
I think that's a direction we can give here today as to whether that's the scope, and I think rough numbers, we just set the dollar amount and we'll come back with some options based on that dollar amount in the budget, but I think those guidelines will be part of the motion that we come to. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Interesting discussion on this item around the table. I think my opinion may be totally separate from that's been shared by everyone else around the table. I see this item as very much coming under achieving sustainable service delivery, which is integrating an asset management program with the long-term financial plan. The reason I say that is I see Council's responsibility on an energy plan for the community being primarily focused on the public facilities that we have, all of our buildings. That component has not yet been rolled into asset management, but it will factor in to it at some point in the future. At that time, a total assessment of the buildings, what their energy footprint is, will be determined, hopefully, through that process, and any review of that will include options, hopefully, for improving the energy efficiency of buildings, and will indicate what the funding is. I would then think that anything that has a return on investment that is under 5 years, it would be within Council's purview to immediately fund those projects going forward. But because this is not even considered in this line item, it hasn't been part of the discussion yet, I have difficulty supporting it as it is presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Just a couple of brief words. I think the critical part for us, I tend to agree with Councillor Patterson on the primary focus. If I look at the strategic energy management plan that came forward, that gave us all those great returns, it was looking granularly at, what is coming up and due, and where's our ability. So things like replacing a chiller, looking at energy loops and things of that nature specific to our operations that had a payback, and using those savings, even if we can't get the CARE up, possibly building a program over time to reinvest those savings back into things that may have a longer timeline, as CAREP was intended to do. CAREP, just for those, one of the conditions of it was things that we would not normally operationally do. So if a payback time was maybe 10 years instead of 5 years, we wouldn't do it. But the CAREP allowed us to make that investment to speed that up. So I think we should still look at those kind of programs. And I think that, if I was looking at this project, I would hope that we would do a very deep dive into the buildings, into the other operational pieces, and look at short, medium, long-term investments that we could make to achieve those, and a program that we could reinvest the savings from that into ways of continuing that investment. I don't want to dismiss the other community aspects. I think that's probably an important, and maybe if we can include that in that dollar amount, I'd be very supportive of that. But I just want to make sure I would separate those two quite cleanly, because I think they're quite different. But I do definitely support where this is going on this one. I think that's the intention, and frankly the urgency of this is undisputed. So, any other discussion on this before we move on to the? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Name.
On the time frame that you just brought up, that was a point I intended to make and overlook. But says in one place that that would be done at the end of 2024, another place it says halfway through 2024, but that, I mean, I appreciate there's a lot of work here, but I don't know if that's a kind of project that council would like to see hastened somewhat. It's just a thought. Almost another 2 years out seems a long ways away.
I might just go to staff and ask, is the dates that are included in there in terms of timing, can you give any explanation of that particular timing?
Yes, Your Worship. We don't really have a staff member who is dedicated and assigned the task of addressing the climate action portfolio. So it probably fits within kind of the general strategic initiatives title that captures things that don't logically fit or haven't traditionally fit anywhere else in the organization, which means it lands possibly on my plate. And I need to finish the marina lease negotiations before I can even start to turn my mind on this. So it's really just from it's very important, but there is also other things that are filling up work plans. And so it was really an availability of when's the next available time to take on a project like this.
Sure, thank you very much. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And could we get a reminder just on the intent of adding a facilities manager to the staff? Because a facilities manager would definitely be looking at the operational components of the building.
Sure. Ms. Bade, can you address that? That is a position that we have approved, but it's not yet filled.
Thank you, Your Worship, and certainly the pieces with respect to the actual district buildings, you'll see that there is a significant chunk there is time devoted to from the engineering and public works section to provide input into the portions relating to the facilities management portion. So that function is absolutely intended to contribute to this. If there is a community component to this project, depending on what council's direction is, then that would likely not fall to that individual. So it really depends on what this project looks like if council moves it forward. And as I said earlier on, we would be bringing forward a project charter once the budget parameters are set to discuss that. And the assignment of the staffing component of this, depending on what else council directs, may shift because our CAO has to look at the full package of work that's been assigned by council and figure out where best to allocate that. So depending on what the overall portfolio looks like when council's done with your deliberations, then some of these pieces in terms of responsibility may move around.
Thank you very much for that. And I think, I'm just going to, as being a little mindful of time here, we're not making final decisions on these pieces. We're really here to ask questions to see if they make alignment and whether to include them in the draft budget. And then we'll have that more detailed, look at the costs and and whether to allocate them in the budget or not at that time. So I just I appreciate all these questions. I think they help clarify the ask and that timing piece. But I also want to make sure we get to all these pieces today as well in a timely fashion. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And that was the reason for my question, because I believe the facilities manager that position is already in the financial plan.
It is. All right. I don't see any other hands up on. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, and I appreciate what we're doing today. We're just wondering whether it would be useful to have this B-line, a prepared community energy plan, have it split into two. One that is district focused, which would potentially be run by a facilities manager, and one that is community focused, where staff is not sure who would do it because we don't have enough hands available today. So that's why I would like to see this split into internal versus external to ensure that at least one of them moves forward. Is that something we would do today via motion, or would that become forward at a later time, at budget time?
We may do it tonight by way of motion and create those two pieces so they'd be separate budget items if that's the will of council. I think we'd also just take some input from staff in terms of what the impact of that would look like. But it's certainly, I wouldn't do it right now, Councillor Zelka, but as I go through these and seek motions on each of them, that would be the time to do that.
So we'll be making a motion about that. Thank you.
Don't see any of your hands on these, so moving on to item number C, which is the operationalized deer management. Another project near and dear to Ms. Bay's heart. Anything you wish to touch on this, Ms. Bay, in terms of an overview?
Thank you, Your Worship. Council's been providing money in conjunction with provincial funding over the past number of years. I think it's about 5 years now towards a deer management project. It's been in as part of a research project in association with the Urban Wildlife Stewardship Society over the past number of years. They have now prepared some summary reports of progress and successes with respect to the project, and I've linked to those in the at the end of this initiative backgrounder for Council's information, and reference them in the background section. What we will need direction from Council on is whether to provide some funding in the district budget on an ongoing basis. To date, it's been on from a year-to-year type of thing. And if this is something Council wishes to operationalize, then it will be something that needs to be put in the budget on an ongoing basis. I just in the past, actually just today, found out about where the province's grant program is at for this year, and I'll be bringing forward a report to Council. Well, the deadline is December 10th, so really soon. They don't give us a lot of time to reply to these funding opportunities with respect to next year. They are capping out the provincial grant component to $20,000 per year, which is less than in the past. I'm still working with the partner that we've had in the past. The Urban Wildlife Stewardship Society would like to do another year's worth of research on the project before moving into strictly immunocontraception mode. At this point, the proposal I've seen from them doesn't include immunocontraception. It's purely research going into next year. So that's something that we'll need to get sorted, and in conjunction, especially with the province's limitation now or reduction in the maximum amount available for the grant funding. So. But really, regardless of whether Council wishes to partner with an external player to do the research work, or wishes to go its own way, Council will need money to make that happen. I have asked the province whether they feel the reports that they've been provided with, because the same reports that are linked here in the report have also been provided to the province, whether they feel that information is sufficient to allow us to proceed with the immunocontraception work in the absence of a research project. And I've yet to get a really super clear answer on that. So I need to dig deeper on that. But I'm hoping to get that sorted in the next week or so that I can come back to Council with some recommendations with respect to the grant application, because that may influence how Council considers that. I think the real question tonight isn't whether Council wishes to apply for a grant or whether how exactly that might play out, but rather, do you wish to allocate some funds to managing deer, regardless of how that plays out. How it plays out can be dealt with at a separate meeting and a separate discussion. Thank you.
And it sounds like we'll have a more detailed discussion on that coming up. So I have Nay, Braithwaite, Green, and Zelka.
Through you, Mayor, I was going to ask some questions, but I think you've largely answered the question. I was curious where that was all going with the province. I think overall this is being worth doing, and would like to continue supporting it. But I appreciate what you're saying, Ms. Bay, that we need to understand what is happening with the province. I was also wondering, and maybe this is premature as well, about the possibility of other partnerships with municipalities that we adjacent municipalities, but again, it probably is not worth putting that kind of effort in until we sort of understand where this is all going. So I think that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. I will say I think there is a lot of interest from my conversations with neighboring municipalities to participate in an operationalized version of our program. So it comes down to whether or not the province would approve an operationalized version of our program, and we don't have that answer yet at this point, as I understand it. Thanks, Ms. Bay. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And Ms. Bay, in your description of context, it talks about having to do an RFP because it's not in the context of a nonprofit partnership, but for a research project, but it would have to go to a competitive procurement process. So it could actually be a lot more than what it has been in the past if we were to do to continue on research or to continue on inoculation. Is that correct?
Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. The part about the procurement process is if we were to do it outside the terms of a research project as we've done to date. So if council were, for example, if the province were to accept the research work that's been done and said you are good to go out and proceed with just the immunocontraception piece in the absence of a research program, then the recommendation would be to issue an RFP for folk to undertake that immunocontraception work and possibly in conjunction with other municipalities if the province were to allow the project to happen outside the context of a research project. I will say that for example, I know Esquimalt is proceeding with their own program and they've teamed up with UWSS as well. So I don't know whether there'd be an ability in the short term to tackle that, but there are other players in the region as well. And all that to say, there is still very much interest on the part of UWSS to do another year's worth of research, and they would feel strongly that we need another year's worth of research in order to conclude the project. And so there are many aspects to consider here, and I will be bringing back a more fulsome report in support of the grant application in the next couple of weeks here. And as noted earlier, the question is, does council wish to set aside funding? And we will have answers to some of this probably before budget discussions. So this is kind of like, what do you want us to put in the budget documents, recognizing that by the time budget comes forward, we'll have an answer. Even if council does choose to put forward a grant application, we'll know even whether the province has approved that grant application.
Thank you. I mean, to hear that the province isn't going to give more than 20,000 now, in the past they gave over 40 per year, and knowing that over the past 5 years we've spent over $270,000 on this, and finding out that the UWSS would like to do yet another year of research, I find it really difficult to support this. So I wouldn't agree with putting this to move forward. I don't think, I mean, I think that it's going to, I'm pretty sure I know what everybody else around the table is going to say, but who knows. But I think we've dedicated a lot to this, and it's time for either the province to take over in its entirety, or for us to just put a stop to this for the amount of money that's been put into it already. So it's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I should just point out that this program from the province was always capped at $100,000 in total and always capped at $20,000. They made a special dispensation to us over the last couple of years to allow us to apply for up to $42,000 in terms of our granting application process, but they were very clear that that would not continue, but they did recognize there was exceptional costs through this research phase. So I don't want to suggest that it's changed. It's actually reverted back to what it's always been. They didn't make the exception. So go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And as everyone knows, I have supported this program, and I think that we've gotten an amazing result from UWSS. If we'd had to pay real dollars for this kind of research and this kind of program and intervention, it would have been a lot more costly. Certainly it's helped to having grant funding from the province, but also this program has become a model, not only for the region, but apparently across Canada and in other parts of BC. So it would be too bad, I think, if we decided not to proceed, excuse me, with an additional year of research, but I would certainly like to hear what that would involve and what that would look like and what the outcomes would be from that research. But I think this partnership has been a very good one and a very active one, and I think we owe a great debt to UWSS, and I think they've done great work. So thanks. I would support this going forward.
Thank you. Just for clarification, the line item here is really to operational deer management. So it's really looking at us funding a program going forward to sort of ongoingly try to manage the deer population on an annual basis. I guess that's just for that clarification. I think if it's a 1-year study, then that's a separate sort of one-off item that we're really looking at. So, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Zelka, and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I agree with my council colleagues. I think this program has been excellent, and I've seen some very good results so far. I understand that the results of the last year, or the results of the current research initiative, is going to be presented shortly. I just wanted to just clarify with staff, when will we be getting the latest reports from the UWSS or maybe value add to those reports?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. They are included in your initiative background or under the links to related documents. There are 2 links there. If you click on those, you'll get UWS's latest report. They're also available on our website.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I apologize, I had missed that. I do note that in the background it says that the CRD is not interested in doing a deer management service on behalf of all the municipalities. However, when those sort of things happen, then the local authorities get together, and those that are interested often go ahead and just do their service on themselves, such as, for example, the Royal and McPherson Theatres. That's an initiative of only Victoria, Oak Bay, and Saanich. But I wanted to ask that if this was going to be operationalized and it's more than just Oak Bay, then I presume then all of the local authorities who are interested in operationalizing it with us, such as, for example, Esquimalt and maybe possibly Victoria, and I understand Saanich has also expressed an interest, I presume they would be part of this RFP, and they would also be part of the cost of paying for the RFP. Just want to confirm what staff's understanding is if we were to operationalize this after the research is finished.
Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first step would be having the province allow us to undertake this work outside the scope of a research project. Really, as long as it's in the research phase, then the province has made it clear that only Oak Bay is authorized to undertake this. I think they've also, they're experimenting under a slightly different program with the Esquimalt currently. But the notion of coordinating with other municipalities would really be in the context of the province giving the okay to do this outside a research project. And that's the part that we don't yet know whether we have that permission.
Thank you.
Thank you. If only we had a member of the Provincial Urban Deer Advisory Committee, also known as PUDAC, in this meeting, then we might be able to get an answer to that question. So a question through to you, Chair. Are you still a member of PUDAC, and would you happen to be able to know an answer to that question?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I am, as far as I know, still a member of the Provincial Urban Deer Advisory Committee. It does meet once a year, and it does meet to review the grant application pieces. So it's not an advocacy group in the sense of going there. However, in that meeting, it is possible to ask questions of the provincial veterinarian and or others that are attending on that issue. So it's just want to make sure I give some context there. I think a more powerful aspect here, and maybe a motion arising towards the end of this evening, if it's of the will of council, maybe to write a letter specifically making the formal request of the province. But actually, no, it shouldn't happen tonight. It should happen after our meeting with seeing the results. We should make that request more formally of the province to allow us to turn this into an operational item and not just a research project.
Thank you so much, Chair. I agree with you completely, and also with the suggested timing. Once we see once I guess we all review the results to date, and I'm in favor of this moving forward to finish the research, and we can all pat ourselves on the back for some incredible work that's been done that has a very good social. With respect to respecting the social contract, I'm really pleased to see very, very few people have complained, and most people are wildly in favor of this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments. I did read the reports attached. They are somewhat technical. And so I was looking at the graphs, and it looks generally like with the fawn abundance that has been reduced. So and I know, just an independent, I had no fawns born this year for the first time in several years in my yard. That's not exactly qualified data, but nevertheless, it is somewhat pleasing to me. But so I don't have trouble moving this forward right now. However, I would like to hopefully have more condensed information on what has been achieved, because I know there's up and down years, right? I'm not sure that I understand all of the scientific reasons that go behind that. So for us to move forward when it comes time to looking at this with the financial plan, I would hope for just a bit more cohesive data on what has been achieved since the onset of the program to show that it's moving in the right direction, and then kind of our goals of, if we operationalize this, what our goals would be going forward. So, but with that caveat, I have no hesitation in moving it forward at this point.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Just one last comment. In my experience in Oak Bay in the last 11 years, I think it's better to ultimately operationalize than politicize the issue, because I don't think that serves anyone well when it becomes a political issue. And I think Oak Bay did the right thing in depoliticizing and moving it forward, as a research project. And I think that's the best outcome.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments. I'll give my 2 cents on this, and that is, I've been waiting through the research phase. I see the only point of the research phase was to confirm or deny whether or not it's effective. If it's effective, then I think we should make it happen and apply contraception to all the deer we can get our hands on. So I think, and bring as many people in the region on board with us at the same time. So if this is the first step in that, and if the province agrees that it's effective, then hopefully we can move down that path more quickly than slowly. And we couldn't have been there without all of the incredible work that UWSS and their research and everybody else have been able to put into it. So I'm very, very appreciative of all the work that's been done, and I think it's if we can move it forward at this point, I'd be very happy to see that happen. I don't see any other discussion on this one, so let's move on to the health and enhanced washroom cleaning and garbage pickup and graffiti removal. Ms. Bay, is this something that you want to provide a quick overview for?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would defer to Ray Herman, our Director of Parks, Recreation and Culture, on this one, please.
Okay. Mr. Herman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Great. I think the initiative itself and the background is fairly straightforward, but in terms of how we got here, there was an enhanced level of service compared to sort of pre-COVID times that took place in 2021, this past spring and summer. That was we were able to do that within existing budget, largely because we didn't have a lot of special events. There was no tea party or paddle fest, things of that nature, and no sports tournaments in the park. So one of the park seasonal staff was dedicated to providing enhanced service in the outdoor washrooms and cleaning up garbage. And that was following 2020, when you may recall our parks were quite busy in the first year of the pandemic, and garbage was often overflowing and things of that nature. So the enhanced level of service did take place in 2021 within budget. However, in 2022, we anticipate that many of those tournaments and special events are going to return, which will require staff time to support, which will would suggest that we won't have the ability to dedicate a seasonal employee to providing the same level of service as just took place in 2021. So this initiative not only it actually enhances the level of service in terms of the timelines. This would be for 6 months, April through September, which typically this past year, that level of service took place from May to August.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. I have a number of hands going up for questions. So I have Councillor Zelka, Patterson, nay, and Braithwaite.
I apologize, my hand was still up. I passed.
Okay, Patterson, nay, and Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. While I don't disagree with the need perhaps for this, I don't believe that this is council priority initiative. I really think this is an operations item, and it should be just included in the financial plan as a recommendation from operations, which hopefully they staff are enabled to do on their side of things.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think this probably ended up here because we got, at least I certainly had feedback passed through to staff about the issues around the lack of cleanliness of washrooms and pieces that were going on, and so they've upped that. So I tend to, how it gets onto the budget, I guess, is a little bit irrelevant. It's really just a recognition of problems that we had and ways of addressing it. Perhaps I might just turn to Ms. Varela to if she has any comments about its inclusion here or another part of the budgeting process.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a service level question, which falls fully within Council's purview. So again, if Council indicates they want a service level change, something has significant budget or staffing impact, we do want Council to consider it at the outset of the budget process. So staff has some edges about what to bring forward with that more fulsome budget discussion that you'll be having in the new year. Again, this is a new practice for staff and Council, bringing these items forward this early in the year. Usually you wouldn't see these into the year you were actually considering budget. So this is a big step forward. It might be why it feels a little unfamiliar, but it really is giving Council and staff time to figure out these service level changes or additional initiatives in advance of the 2022 budget process. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Varela, and perhaps some clarification on this then. If for instance, if tonight as a council we feel like this has merit, does it then go in and become part of the Parks and Rec budget that's in the provisional budget, or does it stay as a separated line item? How is that sort of carried forward into the budgeting process? And maybe that's more of a question for Mr. Payne than it is for Ms. Varela. Or Ms. Bay seems prepared to answer that question. Well,
Thank you, Your Worship. So these will really move forward. If Council provides direction tonight, then this would move into the budget process, and this would show up as an operational boost because it is related to the operational budget line. But as Ms. Varela mentioned, the reason it shows up here is because it is a service level change, and that is a form of Council priority. Or
okay.
Your Council initiative.
And governance, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you for the explanations. And so then if we could have some understanding of the impact, the overall impact, percentage-wise or dollar-wise of the service level increase, so that we can understand as a council exactly the magnitude of the decision that we're making on the overall service level, because I really do have difficulty, Mayor, I apologize for this, but I do have difficulty thinking that if some of this work needed to be done, that staff would come back to council seeking approval for additional cleaning. I would think that if events are going on and it is required that there be some sort of leeway, surplus within that overall budget to accommodate these types of things rather than a specific service level increase to council?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. This is the first year we're doing this, so I think some of these questions are natural to kind of tease out a little bit. This is not a response to events. This is an ask of, do we wish to add this to the budget ongoing for those changes in service? Is there anything you wish to add, Ms. Bay? As you just push the microphone away from yourself. Welcome back.
Thank your worship. I think that question may be better directed to the Director of Parks and Recreation, as this is the area that he operates.
Okay, sure, thank you. Mr. Herman, perhaps you can just talk to this in terms of the service level change, the delta here as to what was provided and what's being contemplated here.
Well, Your Worship, it allows for a staff person to be working evenings and weekends, visiting some of those washrooms multiple times a day, because as I'm sure you can appreciate, oftentimes when the washrooms are quite busy, 5 minutes after a staff person has cleaned them, they can be messy and dirty again. So basically evening and weekend service for those 6 months, with in addition to garbage pickup on evenings and weekends, and then some graffiti removal in there as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Herman. Any other discussion on this item? Go ahead. Oh, sorry, I have Councillor Ney and then Braithwaite.
I'm pretty sure I'm going off on a tangent, Mr. Mayor, so you just tell me, close me down, but this service level issue, I don't actually have an issue with it, whether it's operational or governance, but I'm going to just take this opportunity to comment on the garbage cans, which are small and not able to recycle things. They get overflowed like so quickly. I understand why they need the service, because they get filled so quickly. But maybe at another point, Mr. Mayor, we could sort of give some direction or anything, for the council to have a discussion around the garbage cans in the community that just don't send the right message around recycling. It's just not consistent with the overall message that I think we want to convey in the community. And I'm sure there's a cost issue related to this, but maybe at some point. Okay.
It's tangential, but actually relevant, and I think this is exactly the place to be having these kind of discussions. So I've got a little list going of a couple of items that I can sort of see circling back to at the end of this formulated list. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, and then Councillor Appleton.
Thanks. Actually, my questions have been asked already because it was around the operational budget thing. But I would fully support this. I think the increased use that we've seen over the last 2 years of our parks and the washrooms, because of people increasing the use in the parks, we really need to enhance this service. So I would be fully supportive of it. And I like the idea of having recycle bins as well.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just speaking to the point that we're actually speaking to here, fully in support of what's presented here, and similarly have recognized sort of that staff have definitely been creaking under the load of helping to maintain those spots and how fast we do accumulate garbage and how much pressure those public spaces have been under, especially. So fully in support of that. I did just want to ask for one clarification, speaking to something Councillor Patterson mentioned and Ms. Barella's comments, maybe get a little bit more information from staff, just to say, so I recognize that then the intent is through the strategic initiatives process to capture staffing needs that may constitute a change in service levels. So then would we expect, maybe this is still in flux, but would we expect that all positions or all HR needs that would constitute a level of service change would be captured on this list? Or would there be other changes to staffing, FTEs, and those types of things that would be presented separately at the budget time? So I guess I'm wondering, is the objective then to capture all needed FTEs for service level improvements across departments as part of the strategic initiatives process in the future, or do I have that wrong?
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I think these are the questions that we're trying to, first time you go through anything, we'll tease these items out. Ms. Bay, that question is probably best directed to you in terms of what the delineation here is between the budget process versus this process.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and full disclosure, I think it's very much a work in progress, and it'll be tweaked based on feedback that we get through this year and what works and what doesn't. These kind of things usually get refined with use, so certainly happy to make changes to meet council's needs. With respect to those, these are really driven by council. There may be additional aspects that, let me take one step back. There may also, and you'll see a couple of other items as initial backgrounders here where staff have identified based on discussions that we've heard at staff at the council table, for example, relating to asset management. We know that we'll need additional staff in order to be able to deliver on what council has expressed as needs around asset management. And so we brought those forward. So anything related to council's objectives, the discussions that council has had over the course of the year, items that you have specifically brought to our attention will be coming through this process. What we haven't done here is looked at it from a staffing perspective and said, well, gee, what's happening generally speaking with respects to needs that are out there, and that's one of the things that you'll see referenced in your covering reports and why we're preparing an HR management plan, an HR plan for the district. And so that we've gone to thus far, we've got kind of a framework for capturing that information. And once we get some direction from council through this process and through the budget process, then we can start to put some flesh on the on those on that information as well and bring that forward to council. And that's really the time at which council will have a better sense of kind of the overall HR needs of the organization as we see it going forward for the next several years. So this is a somewhat focused piece on the staffing implications associated with council's priorities. And then soon to come, very soon, we will be able to bring forward that broader information from the HR plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bay, for that. Okay, any other comments or questions? Don't see any. I think I'll just my 2 cents on this. I do believe that we have an obligation, and I think it's self-fulfilling. If you keep sort of set a high standard of cleanliness and graffiti removal and things, it tends to encourage the community to keep things clean and cleanly. So I think there is a minimum required here to kind of make sure, and I think extending it into the evenings and weekends makes a lot of sense. I fully endorse, we've had this conversation before and probably should have been on this list about doing a more thorough look at how can we extend the question of waste reduction and encouraging recycling and so forth to our streets, which would mean larger bins, separated bins, et cetera. And perhaps, so I've got that as a note to follow up at the end of this to see if there's will of council for some of those details to come back as an option as well. I don't see any other hands up on this, so I'll move on to the next item, which is Building First Nations Relations. And Ms. Bay, did you want to do an introduction for this?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. This is one of those items that to be determined in terms of where the responsibility for executing is a bad choice of words, but delivering on this particular initiative would fall. This is really intended to follow up on council's and respond to council's interest in advancing work on First Nations relationship building, with really the scope to be determined as per council's direction. You'll see here that we've got the proposed scope at present to be providing skills-based training to staff and council on intercultural competencies and engaging with local First Nations to identify areas of mutual interest, and exploring potential partnerships and undertaking other projects as identified by council and through discussions with First Nations. So I just read that just to give you a sense of, it's undefined at this point. It's wanting to leave some room for additional work, recognizing the importance of those relationships to the district, and very much seeing Songhees First Nation and Esquimalt First Nation as partners in this initiative. So seeing this fleshed out in concert with additional discussions with those two First Nations. So if this is something that council was interested in, then once again staff would be bringing forward a project charter to further scope this out. So it's really providing a resource to allow that additional work to happen.
Thank you for that, and I think this is one that has unanimous intention of council to put some money in there to help us move forward with our relationships. So I don't anticipate, but I think some of the nuance or questions are worthwhile here. Go ahead, Councillor Ney, and then Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm very pleased to see this on this list here, and just a couple little details is. I agree generally with what's being suggested here, but and I would suggest that around education that there's some really good free Coursera MOOC courses that can be accessed. Like University of Alberta has a fabulous 12-week piece. It's all free. It's a MOOC, right? So, and very comprehensive, dealing with both the history and current issues, and, brings you us up to speed on legislation issues and stuff, whatnot. I guess my comment around this is, I have no problem with the funding of it, but I do think that rather than sort of piecemeal educating just staff and council, we're able to work towards developing a more comprehensive plan about how we do this work between ourselves and with our First Nation partners in this area. And to that idea of a plan, I'm thinking this goes beyond just, of course, staff. We have to begin somewhere. I appreciate that. But I really think it's just as important that all community members who are working on committees, commissions, also have that education, which really should be free, and it should be a requirement that they come up to speed, because this work impacts all of us. Like, to have this lens about how we move forward together, we all need to be paddling in the same canoe, so to speak. So I think that's important, and I think the idea of a plan goes beyond just sort of piecemeal education, that it built into how we do the work on our committees and commissions. It's about how we set up our protocols for engaging with our First Nation and who does that. And without a plan, we don't know who's doing what when. So I hope that that's something we can at least have some further discussion about and what that might look like. But I generally I support fully the allocation of some funds that we do this kind of work.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ney. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, and I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Ney. And I just had a couple of, if you don't mind, if you'll bear with me, just a couple of edits on this document, only because, Ms. Bay, this is a public document, so I just wanted to suggest the word Aboriginal be deleted from the text and replaced with the word Indigenous. I think that's important. And then it would be First Nations and Indigenous communities. I would suggest adding and Indigenous communities, because they aren't exactly the same. You can be a First Nation. You will always be an Indigenous community, but not all Indigenous communities are First Nations. And the final thing, and this follows on Councillor Ney's comments, the opportunity to build, I would add the term long-term relationships. I think, because I agree, this, if I'm just looking at it as someone who doesn't really know, it looks like it's a one-off, once-only kind of, it has proposed and ongoing question marks. So I think long-term is important. I also agree that it is about a larger plan. And I think Councillor Ney has articulated that well. And I appreciate your indulgence in the small edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I would just later in that it does talk to speaking strong, long-lasting, and mutually beneficial relationships. So that is integral to that piece. But I think the more we can emphasize that, the better. So thank you. Is there any other discussion? Councillor Appleton.
Oh, thank you, Worship, and fully in support of this initiative, and yes, absolutely concur that council needs to be putting resources towards active work in this regard. I guess I would just make the small comment, just in terms of sort of what I would see as an underlying tenet of how this would roll out. The backgrounder identifies, the provision of training, undertaking projects through discussions with First Nations and liaison with First Nations. So basically, training and discussions. I guess I would see it as a guiding principle that, if possible, training and contractors, that those things be delivered by Indigenous people or by groups that are specifically endorsed or supported by them. So in as much as we can receive that training, receive those learnings and have those discussions directly with Indigenous people, I would like to see that be sort of an underlying tenet of the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Patterson, and then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. And I, like my colleagues around the table, I do really support this. My concerns, I guess, are that this is for the 2022 budget. It does say in the first page of the report that the 2022 version of our council priority plan would to be prepared in June or July. I don't wish to wait until June or July, certainly on this initiative. In fact, even to hesitate until the end of financial planning, I see that being pushed out quite far. So what I am wondering is, at this point in time, what type of funds are available? As I believe Councillor Ney pointed out, there are some very good programs that are available at no charge. And so I think that there is work that could be done in advance of funding for this going forward. So I would be looking to staff also for recommendations on that.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson and Ms. Bay. I should also just point out as a reflection of appreciation. I know every single member of our senior leadership team in the municipality has undertaken in the last few months at the BCIT Indigenous Awareness Training. So I just want to express my appreciation for the effort that our staff have gone through to make sure they're up to speed on things as well. Ms. Bay?
Thank you, Your Worship. That was the point I was about to make.
So there is certainly training out there. And I think your point, Councillor Patterson, about escalating this, especially if it's being funded from surplus, if we can begin that initiation sooner rather than later in terms of that piece that might be a question, Ms. Bay, that comes back to just consideration of. I think there's agreement here on doing this and moving it forward. So the question really is just how do we, can we do that with this year's surplus in tow, or are we limited to next year's budget process?
Thank you, Your Worship, and that's certainly something that staff can take away following Council's direction. And if I may, just to the point earlier on about the updating of the Council Priority Plan, that's when the document itself will be updated, but that doesn't mean that we can't proceed with work before that's done. It's just that's updated on an annual basis following the budget allocations, just so that we have that one point in time where we know that we capture everything once the budget is finalized.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, because I saw that date. I thought that's oddly late in the whole process. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to my council colleagues for all the wonderful discussion around this item. I'm in agreement with Councillor Patterson. If there's any way of moving this forward earlier instead of later, including whether we can pass the motion as soon as the budget process allows us to release these funds to make them available for some sort of training, I would support that as well. So I do see that this is specifically focusing on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action, specifically number 57. And in the wording of number 57, it uses the words Aboriginal and Indigenous and Crown relations with Aboriginals. Those are legal terms in our Constitution. And anyone who uses Google Maps will notice that there are Indian reserves, because again, those are legal terms that have not been replaced yet, unfortunately. So I am sensitive also to terminologies, but these are terms that are used by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we're all doing our best to be sensitive to what we're saying. So I do want to see this expanded beyond just some training and just something a bit further. I would hope it doesn't have to wait for another year, and I'm not quite sure how to proceed on that. But at the very least, we would need this as a fundamental training for all of us. And you know, at the provincial government, at the federal government, this training is continuing and is being pushed out there by many, many different organizations. So the last comment I'll make is, instead of hiring a consultant, just the District of Oak Bay, since I'm sure Sanders, Victoria, Esquimalt, CRD, they're all doing this, probably all around the same time. Since the province just did this, and then I had a chance to participate in some training up there in the last year. If it might make sense, similar to that item on the DEER program a few items ago, that to see if maybe a shared RFP might be more appropriate, since we're all basically getting the same training on the same sort of stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zilka. I think the second part of that is though very important, which is the contractor would actually help us liaise with First Nation communities to build those relationships. And I think that investment in that local resource to help us directly is a significant portion of that. So I think you're probably quite right that there's a portion of this that the training could be made available jointly in pieces, and there are probably some aspects that we would want more direct assistance with. So Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I don't want to prolong this. I total agreement with what everybody said. So happy to see this on our new council priority items, and in full support.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I think everything that was going to be said, that I was going to say, has been said, and I really appreciate the enthusiasm with which this council is undertaking this. And for any of you who haven't undertaken any of the free online courses, I would certainly encourage you. The BCIT one is excellent. There's a number of other ones that you can take that just sort of it's a learning path that we all undertake. And so I think anything we can do on our own, as well as through more formalized processes through the district, is always appreciated and helpful. So thank you for that. And I'm just making a note about, for me, on the timeline when we come back to this for motions. Moving on, we have the increased capital output 3 to 5 times. Mr. Haran, I am fully aware that this is going to you. Welcome back to the meeting. And for those watching at home, Mr. Haran is our Director of Engineering Services.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. This initiative backgrounder comes out of the some of the conclusions drawn from the Strategic Infrastructure Renewal Plan that was presented in September, which talks about some of the gaps in terms of infrastructure funding and plans for the future in terms of bridging those gaps to achieve sustainable service delivery. And that reporting focused on funding questions, but then there's a follow-on that comes once some of these ideas to increase infrastructure renewals funded, the project delivery, the increased maintenance, the actual capital program, how to take that increased funding and turn it into replace water mains, replace pump stations, replace roads. How to do that effectively is really what this initiative backgrounder is about. So it really talks about how do we do this and how does the council from a governance perspective get involved in this, and how does council weigh in? So there are changes that we have to look at to process how we define and develop projects, how we manage and deliver these projects, changes to our teams potentially in terms of full-time equivalents, and changes to our requirements for external support, so contractors and other service delivery ideas. All of this to say, defining these and capturing them on paper and bringing them to council is not a normal, routine, straightforward municipal work for an engineering, public works, and finance team. So this is a strategic consideration. So it's essential that Oak Bay figures out how to grow in terms of maintenance and renewal, and we just need to recognize that it's a significant effort that can't be completed at the same time in terms of normal work if the department is also trying to deliver on multiple other strategic initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. I see there's no cost attached here, so this is just really a recognition of that piece. Can you, just for my clarification, because Council gave direction to come back in early next year with a report on taking the financial recommendations and turning it into more operational impacts. Is that where the detail of this would come through?
Yes, Your Worship, this is the same. So this comes from the reason why this backgrounder is on the agenda tonight is because of that council direction. I think it just needs to be recognized that we've received direction from you as a council to come back to talk about some of these issues, but we wanted to include, to make sure that they were thought about, things like this one, were thought about in the big picture so that as other strategic initiatives and priorities are considered, that the doability, the achievability of all that could be on the plate is factored in. So we wanted to make sure that it was a big picture perspective being brought to the table tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is that same thing that we spent some time talking about, but are there any questions of Mr. Haran? Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this recommendation, Mr. Haran. You commented on it being additional work to typical operational work, which I certainly appreciate, but then, and perhaps this won't come forward until we look at it within the financial plan, but what are the alternatives for, in fact, getting this information without additional resourcing on our staff, like, or will that be fully scoped out when it comes to council for the financial plan piece of it?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Haran?
Yes, through your worship, I think that's a good question, and the reason why we need to talk about it is there's a lot of information that we, meaning staff, know and understand, but we haven't had the opportunity to present it or talk about it publicly so that the community can see what our analysis shows and what we're thinking. And then we haven't been able to provide you with any of that background so that you feel some comfort with some of the recommendations that we're providing. So even for example, the idea that we're going to increase our capital output by 3 to 5 times, we touched on it briefly in the Strategic Infrastructure Renewal Plan discussions, but we didn't go into a whole lot of depth for where does that number come from and is it correct and why are we saying it's that? So I think the community deserves a little bit of information that comes from staff, from my team and from the finance team to kind of lay out what we think it means to what we have been doing in terms of infrastructure renewal in the past few years, and we can show how we're doing more last year and this year than we've done in the years before. We can show that it's not quite enough based on the targets, and even talk about how do we set those targets and what are reasonable expectations going forward. All of those things are extra work enough that they're absolutely essential that I think we bring them forward in the next 6 months for council and the community to see. But we also just wanted to make sure from a staff perspective that we recognize that doing that work, kind of like doing the Strategic Infrastructure Renewal Plan, was extra outside of our normal workloads. It was critical, it was important, but it needs to be focused on. And so we just want to make sure that we don't add other tasks unrelated to this, too many other tasks, so that we're spread so thin that we can't deliver on the most important objectives that council has asked for.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
No, I think I'm understanding it. This is, in other words, this is a placeholder that I would see as taking priority over many other items. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I see where this is coming from. I just wanted to ask Mr. Haran, just with respect to this, specifically references a report and sort of a report with recommendations on delivery capabilities to be done in advance of the 2022-26 financial plan. So what I see here is a plan being developed specifically for that purpose, but this would not be, I would think, the final plan of this type, that this is essentially an iterative process. And I think Mr. Horan will probably have capacity to be able to develop a certain amount of information in advance of the 2022 budget deliberations. But I would suspect that this probably would need to be revisited in subsequent years as scoping evolves. Do I have that right?
Mr. Horan?
Yes, through your worship, I think that's correct. We have a capital program in place planned for this year that we're currently delivering on, as well as plans for projects and development of projects that is underway for next year and the year after. And in the short term, in the next 6 or 7, 8 months, we're resourced to bash ahead and keep going in that direction. What we're anticipating, though, is that we need to accelerate. We need to do more. And there are how much more is yet to be defined. And this isn't what we'll be proposing is a multi-year look at what we think the answer is going to be in terms of how to do 3 to 5 times more capital work than we're currently doing. Important work, but recognizing that it's not something that funding or desires in terms of flicking the switch can ramp up to that kind of output. So there needs to be, as much as we'd like to start doing it yesterday, there's going to be some effort involved and some time, unfortunately, and some patience to be able to grow this capability. So what that means is that council, from a governance perspective, will have plenty of opportunities along the way to set expectations around what work we're going to be doing in terms of renewal, infrastructure renewal, and then define success and then measure that progress as we go through and try to grow into that capability.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horan. I don't see other hands on this topic, so I'm prepared to move on to the next. We have Active Transportation Program, and again, this is, I'll let Mr. Horan give a brief overview, and I understand Councillor Appleton, you wish to speak to this as well. So, Mr. Horan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. This initiative is related to the idea that the current council direction for staff around the capital program, specifically related to transportation, is in the 5-year plan, 500,000 of capital dollars per year for what we call transportation safety, and then an additional 200,000 starting this year for active transportation initiatives. And this backgrounder was proposed to look at the idea of if there were different funding levels or different resources applied to the idea of an active transportation program, then what expectations could council have for that program, and what would it look like in terms of level of effort and potential projects that could be delivered.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate there was, for making sure people have a chance to see it, there was a slight revision to the backgrounder that was released in an update, so just make sure people have the current version of that. Councillor Appleton, you wish to speak first?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate yours and Council's indulgence on this one. This was an initiative that I put forward, and Council will be aware of my interest and my passion for active transportation initiatives. I guess I will start with sort of the larger scale picture, in that this is a council that declared a climate emergency and resolved to take steps to significantly impact emissions and their carbon footprint in the community. We are in receipt of data and information from the CRD that clearly outlines that the district's community GHG impact is primarily through transportation and through housing. We have done very well, as we've already discussed tonight, on the corporate side of things, and have a lot to celebrate corporately with our GHG reductions. We're addressing the housing component through some of the things that we've discussed tonight, and also with projects proposed through the Community Climate Action Work Group, and with some of the larger scale projects that Council has undertaken in terms of housing form. The one thing that we do not have a significant line item for, and we do not have a significant initiative for, is to address active transportation and to address transportation mode shift in the community. So this is a big question mark for us. And you will notice by reviewing the community questionnaire on budget that we just received, you'll notice that the most significant, as Ms. Bay pointed out, the most significant support for any initiative to increase funding was initiatives to take action on climate change, for climate change action. 51% in the questionnaire supported more resources to do that. This, in my view, is one of the most significant things we can do as a community to accomplish that. In addition to that, and in terms of the individual responses in the budget questionnaire that's in the package, there's 31 different responses respecting bike lanes and bike infrastructure in there. There's a 5-to-1 in favor versus against for bike infrastructure, and many comments supporting the expansion of bike infrastructure. We have an existing active transportation plan that has not been operationalized. It's conceptual. It has good information that's still potentially usable in it, but it does not have resources specifically allocated to it, and we've not allocated an initiative, a plan to make that actually happen. So our work on infrastructure really accelerates the need for this. We're going to be doing significant work, as Mr. Horan has just described, and as we've talked about many times over the course of this year, we're going to be doing many infrastructure projects. So it's critical that we talk about active transportation now, so that it can be done in conjunction with our with our infrastructure work, and also with our planning work for the community, village plans, and these other pieces. So it's critical that we understand what we're doing as far as active transportation. And one of the things that I personally get very frustrated with respect to active transportation is that there is money available for this. Essentially, we are not in a position to be able to access grants for active transportation because we have not resourced the work to develop the plans that we need to be shovel ready to do this work, to do this active transportation work. So provided we have done similar work with infrastructure projects of all types to be able to say, if we have the resources set aside, we have the reserves, and if we have a clear plan of what we want to accomplish, then we are in an ideal place to access those grants, and we make those expenditures contingent on those grants. So I would see the same thing happening in this case. So this initiative really relates to, in the first year, to doing project scoping and more detailed design work. As council has heard, the process, what we are looking for at this stage of game is endorsement of the initiative and a potential uplift. The objective always here has been up to $1 million of funding for active transportation projects. The costing for that is to be decided. So that will be for council to determine in subsequent years. But the proposal for a funding level at that amount was for the purposes of saying what is a comprehensive self-contained program for active transportation that can achieve the minimum network. And there's ample evidence that achieving that minimum network, creating that minimum active transportation network, is what gets people moving differently. It affects mode shift, and it gets people who have not previously entertained active transportation to get involved in that. So it is a significant ask. It could potentially involve significant resources in subsequent years, but it is something that is a missing piece in terms of council's direction as far as how we are going to meet climate action goals. This transportation piece is critical, and we just don't have that information. So I have spoken to Mr. Horan, and obviously I've discussed with staff about the parameters of this. So I can potentially answer some questions, Your Worship, but Mr. Horan also can talk about sort of some of the parameters of it. But I encourage, I'm looking forward to hearing my colleagues' thoughts on this, and again, really looking through this process to get endorsement of the development of this active transportation plan, and getting started and getting underway with this. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Braithwaite, then Patterson, then Nay and Green.
Thank you so much. And thanks for bringing this forward, Councillor Appleton. I think it's really timely. And I do have a couple of questions. Number one, I think this question probably goes to Mr. Payne, and that is, under the funding source, I see that it does say taxation. Is there any possibility that this could come out of surplus?
Mr. Payne? And you're thinking specifically about the design component?
The design part, so the phase one, the $125,000, which is what it says, I think, in here.
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, yes. Again, if it's again, we're trying to think about over the coming years, is this going to become an ongoing expense to the district? And if that's the case, taxation is certainly appropriate here. Phase one, there's nothing wrong with funding phase one from surplus. District was forecasting a surplus spending through the end of the year, so that would absolutely make sense. And then, you know, if council chooses to operationalize the findings of the of phase one, then taxation and utilities would be the most appropriate funding source.
Thank you. I think it makes good sense to have something in place. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Appleton, about shovel-ready projects. If we do have shovel-ready projects as far as this goes, then there can be funding there. So it makes good sense for me to do that. I think especially hearing that we could do phase one out of surplus, I think this should go ahead. So it would have my support.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I also thank Councillor Appleton for bringing this forward. It does make sense that that expanded active transportation be considered in tandem with asset management, and it's important to establish certainly what the active transportation network would look like, so that when the planning goes ahead with asset management, we're actually doing it as a cohesive whole. So that makes sense. I was concerned in looking at the report attached, the number of hours that are shown. They are fairly significant, very high, more than 500 hours. And while supportive of this going forward, I would like more details as to how having consulting or other resources to assist with this can fit in, so that it is in step with the asset management program. Because in addition to this, we still have that piece of the facilities that are also not fully resourced yet, that also have to harmonize with all of this. So better understanding, better clarity around how those things can happen, so that they are all moving in line to provide to council the information that we need to ensure that when we are approving certain projects going forward, that we are considering all aspects of it. So if we're tearing the roads up to do the sewers or the water lines, we're not tearing roads up where the bicycle path has existed. So it's a logical sequencing of it. It's just how we manage to facilitate that with the staff we have or additional resources.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Mr. Fran, perhaps can you just answer the question about those hours, and what is that? Is that the hours required for the development of the plan, or that's the hours for the work to implement after transportation in terms of the budget? Just a little bit of clarification on the hours listed there would be helpful, I think.
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you for the question. It's challenging in terms of when putting together an initiative backgrounder to provide the info required to facilitate the discussion, but not to actually do the program options analysis that's being discussed. So I'll try to answer that as clearly as I can. What we're saying is to do program options analysis, in other words, to scope out what this program might look like in terms of funding, FTEs, level of effort by Q3, third quarter of 2022. It's 50 hours or less, and a lot of those hours are likely to be consulting support, and that's where the budget of $125,000 for the first phase, a good chunk of that budget is related to those resources to help us do that. But we also wanted to include the idea that if this program was a $5 million program, for example, as an upper bound of what would a program look like, then what would that be? And so the idea is in presenting a report to council in the new year to say an active transportation program could look like the current one does, $200,000 a year, and what can we deliver? And we talked a little bit about what that program looks like back in the in March, when I brought the report to council to initially answer the Climate Action Working Group's questions about active transportation program. So there's a limited, there's active transportation work that can be done, but limited in scope and level of effort over the years. And then what would maybe something in the middle look like, and what would an upper bound of $1 million per year or so on, and not necessarily, you know, funded from different sources, but what would that program look like? So the 500 hours has to do with the full up program if council decided to go ahead with that. And then the required work that's in the backgrounder is around how many FTEs we would need likely to do that, and what kind of work would be going on to deliver such a program. So it's kind of trying to capture, if the program's approved, what would it look like? But the initial ask is 50 hours and 125,000.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Haran. I have Councillor Nay and then Green.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, thank you, Councillor Appleton, for bringing this forward. I think I get the logic of this. It's, you know, it's to synchronize the work we're doing as we undergo this very large asset management with our road infrastructure. So it makes a great deal of sense. I just look at the project right now. I was looking at the plan that Mr. Haran Engineering has been doing over at the Bowker Cabra Bay. And when we look at that, I think it really becomes clear why this planning project would be very valuable. I note that this particular project has got inserted, for example, bike pathways, which is what we would all want. But it really would be good to know what else is going on either side of the current project. And I think that's kind of where this is all going, at a very simple kind of way of thinking about this. So I'm kind of curious to learn more about how the funding will actually work. I don't quite follow that, but I don't need to take up time here, and just open to further discussions and understanding how that will play itself out. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Councillor Green.
Thank you, and through you, thanks to Councillor Appleton for bringing this forward. One of the things that I always lamented a few years ago was the dissolution of the Environmental Advisory Commission and the dissolution of the Active Transportation Committee, because these kinds of initiatives do need champions. And I think that was one of the questions I had written out in the margins of Ms. Bay's report. Does this need committee or task force support? Does it need a champion? And would that kind of structure help to mitigate the hours that are proposed by staff if they had a group of expert volunteers to support them and assist them? Those are just questions, and I'm sure those will be sorted out as the planning piece is started. But I really appreciate this coming forward, and I think it's a very good initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. And you know, in general, I'm in favor of moving something like this forward. I appreciate Councillor Patterson's suggestion that we do it sort of as the assets get replaced, as opposed to doing something specifically just on this one initiative and then having to tear the road up again for something else later on. So doing it in a very coordinated fashion makes perfect sense, since we have very limited funds. I do note that in our latest financial reporting, $274 million worth of our assets are past their recommended useful life, while others are beyond their useful life and due for replacement. So that's, I think it's maybe closer to 400 million. So we have a lot of money that's due to be spent just on a basic infrastructure. And I would definitely like to see that dealt with ahead of something like this in terms of priorities. However, if it can be done in concert, I think that would be fantastic. So that would be my first comment. And I just also want to just share that I brought forward the second initiative around the preparing a community and energy plan. I didn't realize that we actually had names associated with these things. So while I appreciate Councillor Appleton for you bringing this item forward, I didn't realize that you were owning this. If it matters, I brought forward item B, and of course I support some of the other ones as well. It would be helpful for me to know, in terms of my support for this one, to know what's happening with the 30-kilometer-per-hour default speed limit project that we signed on to with Victoria and Salish. And the reason I ask is that if that project is proceeding and we are reducing our default speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour, well below a concern about crashing for the younger bike riders and the less experienced bike riders, then the need for concrete might be reduced. So if I could ask for an update on that default speed limit project, that would be helpful, please.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Haran, I have heard crickets from the province on this to date. Have you heard anything in terms of the request put forward to them?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I don't have the latest status update on that initiative. I know that the District of Salish is leading the effort to work with the province on a pilot project. So I don't have the latest and greatest on that particular initiative. Although I will comment on something related to this issue, though, which is the idea that if the district was to proceed with a concept of, say, for example, 30 kilometers per hour speed limits throughout the district, that's certainly achievable and a worthwhile outcome for many of the reasons that are discussed. But I think that what will have to happen is not simply changing speed limit signs in order to make that happen. I think what really needs to happen is that the street designs will need to be looked at from the perspective of, if we want drivers to drive 30 kilometers per hour, well, then we'll need to do some things at the street level in terms of traffic calming to encourage that behavior, which of course is an excellent outcome. And if we were to proceed down that path, active transportation program plus transportation safety program being funded to achieve outcomes that the council desires is the way to make that happen. So I think the idea that the community, the community's desires expressed by this council, related to these issues, traffic calming, speeds, safety on the streets, the way to make that happen is to have programs that are funded, and then for staff to come to the council at the beginning of these programs and throughout to define expectations for the program and the individual projects that are within the program, measure the results that we achieve against those, and then seek direction from council to adjust or to move forward or to carry on with the program. Happy that we're doing the things that we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. If I may continue, please.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I very much appreciate hearing Director of Engineering's describe this in a coordinated approach. Very much in favor of that, to make sure that we're spending our dollars incredibly wisely, since we have so few. The $5 million that was mentioned in the report rather scared me, especially when it suggested it would be funded by taxation. So I appreciate the Councillor Braithwaite's suggestion that there might be a way, hopefully, from surpluses where we could fund something in this area. I did also note that if we're not going to use, for example, a speed reduction approach, which I believe would be a very intuitive, innovative, and less expensive a way of dealing with the problem of sharing the road with the electric cars, with the internal combustion engine cars, and with all the other users of the roadway as well. The scooters, electric cars, electric bikes, and human-powered bikes, of course, amongst the pedestrians as well, and those disabled. I do note that in this process, if we're not going to rely on a speed shift, inexpensive approach, and we are going to go with a AAA standardized approach, which I know engineers love. I am an engineer, and I understand that approach. But pouring concrete is an expensive and approach, not only for dollars, but also for the environment. While we know that housing contributes 30% overall to all CO2 emissions worldwide, just concrete, and I'm not talking about any other element, just concrete contributes 8% of all CO2 emissions worldwide, just that one element. So I am definitely looking forward to other innovative ways of finding ways of doing mode shift and road share that does not involve pouring concrete. So I do look forward to some plans that can come forward that would allow us to not repeat the mistakes and just contribute to CO2 emissions and find ways that are doing the same process but less expensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelk. I don't want to get into the debate of the merits of this. I think what I see in here is an approach to active transportation, which is a sort of a more comprehensive look anyway in terms of transportation, whether pedestrian, cycling, public transit, et cetera. I guess my question I have to you, Mr. Haran, is this is split into two pieces. One is really ramping up a timeline. We've as I understand this initiative is we should have this active transportation process underway, but we're ramping up at rapid speed the investment in our overall infrastructure. So we need to have some equivalently detailed plans on our active transportation infrastructure. So I guess my question is to get to that detailed plan, is it a two-step process? Is it a one-step process? I.e., is there sort of an overarching plan that would come, and then that would inform the creation of detailed plans? And is that original piece that's contemplated here for 100,000 or so, is that doable within the supportable with an external contractor under staff's existing available timelines?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm gonna try to answer that, and if I hit the mark, then great. And if I didn't answer the question, then please let me know, and I'll try again. The aim of the initial phase, like so, this backgrounder that talks about putting together a program options analysis by the end of the third quarter of 2022, is around really fleshing out a lot of what's been discussed in the last little bit as we talked about this issue. So the questions of, well, how do you define projects? The questions of how are the projects intended to be funded? So whether they can be partially funded by grants or whether they're going to be funded by taxation. The ideas of, well, what is the community's outcomes that they want from active transportation? Because it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. So from a staff perspective, I will need to come back as part of this options analysis to try to get some direction from council to say, for example, is the focus going to be on the walking aspect of active transportation, for example, and expanding the sidewalk network so that it's more accessible and provides a better walking experience to the district? Does it mean all ages, all access bike lanes with like heavy infrastructure projects the way, say, City of Victoria has done? Or does it mean some more light touch active transportation in terms of cycling projects? And there's a wide range of things that could be done, but without having talked about it at the council table and received direction from you, it's difficult to lay out what a program, to choose on projects. So the first step for us will be to bring forward a little bit of the detail of the studies and the work that we've done in the last few years to try to flesh out potential projects that we could do to say the initial phase, if the program is funded, looks like these following 3 or 4 projects that are shelf ready or nearly shelf ready. And these are things that we could deliver within a year or two after given the go. And then seek some direction around, well, is that suitable for what the council would like, more projects like that? Or would an expanded program, a more ambitious program be desired? Or what should the focus be going forward? So so the first year or so is probably well defined and established because there's projects that we're waiting to do and looking forward to doing. And then there's a council weighing in on priorities and outcomes of what does the active transportation really trying to achieve and over how many years, and what potential funding could be applied to that program so that decisions could be made about what the program looks like going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Appleton, just because you raised this, is that your understanding as well? Is that a fair assessment from your mindset?
I appreciate the question. Thank you, Your Worship. It is, and I think what we have been lacking is really that ability to be overly simplistic. Mr. Horan has described it in detail, but to be overly simplistic to say, if we are going to allocate funds towards active transportation, precisely how is that being applied? We don't have the design work or the options or that preliminary work to be able to say, this is where we can start, this is what is achievable. And so that has prevented us from being able to do constructive work and to be able to access grant monies. So getting us to a spot where we can have a substantive discussion as a council about which projects we wish to approve and how much money we wish to allocate to those things with substantive information in hand, that is what I would like to see happen. And I do very much appreciate my colleagues' comments about synchronizing with existing infrastructure work, and the key about harmonizing with existing infrastructure work and planned infrastructure work is very important. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I think we can all agree that we can only afford to do these things once in this community. So, and I'll go to Councillor Patterson for a second time. I guess my only other comment here is I think this is, and I'm hearing it's eminently supportable around the table here. So one of the questions I'll have when we come back to motions is just timelines. Is there, if we're dealing with surplus as opposed to taxation, can we sort of essentially give the green light to this under existing surplus to start that work? That would help ensure that the work gets done in the time laid out here in this report. So I'll raise that question when we come back to motions, because I think it is probably quite possible to tackle it that way. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I noticed there are several items, and they're placed in different categories, I'm sure for good reasons, but in my mind they all come under asset management. Some of what we're talking about, active transportation, of course, is preliminary consulting work, but should it go forward be rolled into a project, then it becomes part of an addition to the asset management program, and so it is an additional district asset, and I'm sure that I don't have to say anything to either Mr. Horan or Mr. Payne that as an additional or expanded asset in the district, of course, then it's not just the cost of doing the initial work, it is the full life cycle costs attached to the asset. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I don't see any other hands. Oh, it's Councillor Zelka, and then I'll go back to Councillor Appleton.
Thank you so much, Chair. I do note that at COP26 and at other COP meetings, worldwide meetings relating to climate change, that Canada has announced a ban on the internal combustion engine as of 2035. 14 years from now. So, it's time for us to start planning a different kind of a mode shift, most likely electric car. And that, of course, will be another mitigation for climate change. So we just need to factor that in as well as amongst all the other things that we have to factor in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted, before we close off this item, I just wanted to extend my thanks to staff for taking the initiative on and for fleshing it out and providing the background information and their responsiveness to my putting this forward. I'm very appreciative of that and very appreciative of my colleagues' comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. So moving on to item number H, we have on the natural assets and green infrastructure approach to stormwater. This came out of as all these things have out of council conversations. I think this one's probably a little more straightforward for all of us to understand and get behind. I think I circled surplus on this one because it's a one-off piece to do it, and we have that surplus to deal with. Is there any questions on this in terms of clarification or other pieces? Councillor Appleton?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Not so much a question, but I'd just like to acknowledge engineering and public works and staff. This is yet another one of these items that we would not be contemplating or reviewing in this way, a number of years ago. This is, I appreciate, this is a modern and evolutionary approach to asset management and in terms of scoping in natural assets as part of asset management. So just want to extend my appreciation to staff. We're in a very different spot as far as asset management in a bunch of different ways. This is just another example.
Thank you for that, Councillor Appleton. And I know Councillor Zelka has, I remember a couple of years ago, we raised this idea of incorporating this. So having it brought into this as a priority piece makes a lot of sense, and appreciate as well staff's willingness to do so. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'm very much in favor of this, and I know we've been talking about it for a while. The backgrounder does talk about potential daylighting of some aspects of Barker Creek. We already have parts of Barker Creek that are daylit already in Oak Bay that really need attention. And I'm hoping that, first of all, for those areas, that some aspects of that could be tied into this. But I do also note right near the fire hall, Barker Creek backs up, and with the rains we're getting, I don't know if it has, but it's certainly threatening to overflow as it tries to get into that small conduit to take it out under Firefighters Park off to the Georgia Strait. What's it called now? Sorry, I forget the name of the Georgia Strait. That's the new name. So there's a couple of areas that we definitely need to be looking at in terms of using our natural assets as a way of helping. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I think the word you're looking for was a Salish sea, and we've all had that little brain freeze where you can't quite get the word out. So thank you for that. I don't see other hands up on this one. So then we're just assess tools to regulate or permit sidewalk patios. I'm not sure who to go to on this one. Ms. Bay, are you the appropriate body here, as we are short a Director of Building and Planning at the moment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I know our Director of Engineering and Public Works kindly assisted with the preparation of this one in the absence of a Director of Building and Planning, so perhaps we can have Mr. Horan comment on this one as well.
Sure, thank you. And probably most importantly, Mr. Horan, if you could just address that it's listed here as only optional to taxation, so the intention here would be an ongoing program. And maybe I'll go to Ms. Councillor Braithwaite. I'll go to Councillor Braithwaite for staff to give a quick overview. And I'll go to Mr. Horan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So this is actually this is a project, and it's intended to represent a work that has to happen for staff to come back to council to present policy options and a decision-making framework around the concept of making the use of public space for patios for cafes and restaurants and pubs a more permanent idea in the District of Oak Bay. So the report that we provided to council back in July, after the province changed their rules for the temporary expanded service areas, and then kind of triggered the idea that, oh, this is something now that might actually be feasible and reasonable to do in terms of a policy framework, but without having a chance to go to the council, to you, to seek some direction and to show some options around how permitting might be done, how the guidelines for designs and what the rules might be. We have to bring that to you as staff. And unfortunately, because of the level of effort around this task, it just does represent a higher level of effort than the Building and Planning Department can deliver on at the moment. So this is why there's a budget ask in there for consulting support for this task.
Okay, thank you for that. Good, Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, actually, you asked one of my questions, which was going to be why is it coming out of taxation and not surplus? But also, Mr. Horan, maybe you can tell me I noticed the dates in here. The proposed start date is June 1st, 2022? No. January 6th, 2022. Is that right? No, hang on. Which way is that? Is that June? It's June 1st. June 1st, 2022. And so I'm wondering if the reason for that date is that when the temporary permitting that came through from the province ends? Or does it end later on? And then for the end date, I noticed that it goes all the way to 2023. And so then my question would also be, how does that fit in with the temporary permitting end dates that the province has put in place? Or does what we decide as a municipality override those dates.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Haran?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, the start date, to be honest, I'm not sure why we chose the 1st of June for that start date, but I think the answer to the questions are the following. First answer is Council's given some direction around the temporary guidelines that are in place, and there is an end time to those temporary guidelines, but they can always be extended or changed or modified based on Council's desires for that issue. The proposed end is just to represent that the level of effort around this task is not something that is likely to be done within 2022, because there's quite a bit of potential complexity in terms of this question. It could be straightforward and simple, but there's also a fair amount of community consultation and a lot of options around what such a public patio policy could look like. So we need to make sure that we've given enough time to go through the effort and to give council and the community some time to consider the options and weigh in. So that explains the 1 year or over a year worth of effort to go into it.
Thank you. Ms. Bay, you just had your hand up there. You have something to address as well?
I can perhaps just shed some light on the proposed start date. It's because the department to be responsible for this is building and planning, and we're in the recruitment process for that position. It's currently vacant. So the thought was that once that position is hired, that probably require a little bit of time to get up to speed and caught up with some of the other initiatives on that department's plate. And so thinking that that would be a reasonable start date.
Thank you. And I'm so supportive of this. I think that what the Sidewalk Patio program has done within our community has been fabulous. And I don't know of anyone really who has not embraced it. So fully in support of this.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate Councillor Braithwaite's comments. I think the program, particularly during pandemic, was very well received by residents in the community and certainly by the businesses. My only thoughts that are hesitant on this is that it's good to know how the streets can be used in different ways, and that's great. But I would hesitate if this caused limitation to planning the village plan or the roadway systems for transportation modes. So I think it is once again one of these pieces that you need to look at the cohesive whole in order to understand the longer term objectives. And so I think certainly the accommodations that have been offered to date have been really valuable within the community, no doubt about that. And should they fit into an overall village plan? Probably. But what that will look like is difficult to say. So if this would move us towards more permanence, then I would approach it with caution.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you. And I would agree with everyone's comments around the room. This has been a really positive addition to the village, and particularly during pandemic, which prompted it all. And I know the BIA generally has been pleased. And this is something that does require planning, though. And while I'm very supportive on behalf of the BIA as its liaison, I'm also concerned about planning around pedestrian use, and this goes back to, it touches on active transportation, but I know some pedestrian traffic has found navigating some of the spaces challenging at times, depending on how crowded the sidewalk is or how busy the village is at any given time. So that would be the only piece that I would think about going forward is, first of all, partnering perhaps with the BIA business owners to talk about their pedestrian traffic and also to talk to the community. But I agree that I think the concept is a good one. It also encourages real engagement between and among residents because people are sitting outside, they're not sitting inside a building. I think it's done a lot to enhance community engagement in a very informal way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Zelka, but I just also, before we go to you, Councillor Zelka, I'm going to just, it's 9:54. Our meeting is scheduled to end at 10. I don't want to go past 10:30. I think we're diligent. We will wrap this up by then. But I would think a motion to extend to 10:30 is appropriate. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. So we're to 10:30, but you're going to ask for a hard stop at that point, so we'll try and get through our recommendations by then. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for helping with the hard stop. I've got kids here that I got to take care of and get ready for lunches for tomorrow. So, on to this one. In general, I agree with everything that my council colleagues have said about this item I. However, I like the terrible term, killing two birds with one stone. And I like to come up with generalized tools that can be used for this and for other things like this that are going to come forward. So first question I will ask is someone who might be a member, a planner on the call. I know our CAO is a planner. I don't know if we have any other planners on the call, but I understand that this has to do with usage, possibly permitted or not permitted by a zoning bylaw. Is this an example of something that would be permitted or not by the zoning bylaw, or is this something else with respect to regulating permanent sidewalk patios, please?
I'm happy to go to Ms. Bay on this one, but I don't want to get too far into the weeds of this. I think that all we're asking here today is, do we want to peel this out and have staff work on a patio piece of this, or do we want to incorporate it in something else, or do we want to drop it all together? I guess it'd be those three pieces. So do you need an answer to that question, Councillor Zelka, or is that, are you?
I'll just proceed with the point. I think a much more generalized tool that could be used to satisfy this and make it simple for any other initiative that'll come forward, whether we want to, would be to implement temporary use permits. Section 492 of the Local Authority Act, and many other local authorities use that initiative to come up with temporary permits. It lasts up to 6 years, and that is giving us lots of time to do other things. But I would much rather see us use a general tool as opposed to a specific one-off tool. I hate doing one-off things. You know, that to me, that's what the old councils used to do. And what I like about this council is that we try to do something that's forward-looking. And Section 492, a Local Authority Act, temporary use permits, I think would be perfect here instead of a one-off. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Ms. Bay, do you want to have a?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to point out that the initiative is to develop the tools needed to regulate and permit sidewalk patios and prepare associated design guidelines. So staff would look at the most and try and identify the most appropriate tools for that purpose.
Thank you. I think the notion of permanent sort of probably eliminates temporary use, but I don't know the answer to that question for real. So I appreciate that being raised here. I'll just very quickly say so this is a difficult one for me because I absolutely want to move us into having patios as a permanent part of our streetscape and allowing that. I have been amazed. I think it's one of the real highlights of this really dark time of COVID that we've had this sort of ability to see people on the street and do those. That being said, I think the obvious place to put this in place is through the village area planning process, where we can actually mandate widths of sidewalks and other things. So where this would go to inform the bigger picture, I think it would. I'm very supportive of it. I think it definitely should come out of surplus as a one-off design guideline and sort of at least a list of pros and cons of different approaches to inform the bigger picture. I'd be very supportive of that because I see that tying into the broader long-term value. So moving on, without seeing any other hands, to item J, which is the consultant turkey head design. This has sort of come through some of the conversation and pieces. Ms. Bay, do you want to touch on this a little bit? This is a sort of part of our negotiation process. We're sort of walking around this one with some kid gloves, but perhaps you can give a quick overview of this item.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So this is really here to provide some funding to allow for additional consultation to happen within the context of negotiations. So Council may recall that we had questionnaire that went out to the public in the spring as background information for council to consider as you scored the various proposals and identified a proponent for negotiations. So this is really intended to take it that next step further, to obtain council input on those items that are identified through the negotiation process as being suitable for additional input. And so I really can't say a whole lot more about that at this point, because that process is not yet defined exactly what those items would be. I can say that the intent here would be to engage in broad-based consultation on whatever items flow through that process, and that it would be done ideally in concert with the participation of the proponent that we're negotiating with. And this does also tie into some of the relationship building components that we talked about earlier on with First Nations that we're also certainly wanting to advance those discussions with First Nations as part of the work to be done. So that's a high-level overview of what's intended with this initiative, and the exact nature of the work would be defined as we move forward.
So essentially a budget earmark. Okay, other questions on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Ney, and then Appleton.
So under the BC Declaration of Indigenous Peoples Act, Article 32, Provision 1 says that Indigenous people have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. And the second provision under Article 32 states that states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilization, or exploitation of mineral water or other resources. So this request for monies to consult both the community and the First Nations, I think is too late, and I think it should have been done before the RFP was issued. So I wouldn't support this at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate Councillor Ney's comments very much. I guess I would keep it brief and say that I appreciate that there's a budget line item being associated with this in recognition of the communications we've heard from the community about their interest in continuing to be involved in the visioning process for Turkey Head, and reflecting the importance that they place on the area and the significance of it as a public space for the community. So I'm hopeful, less so than just a budget line item or a number. I hope that it shows a commitment on behalf of council to the community to continue community dialogue about this space. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yeah, I just have a question. It's for my own edification, really. I'm just wondering why this item is under potential new council priority items. I'm not sure. I just wondered why it was on this list. I thought it was an ongoing project issue, so that's why I'm asking the question, just for clarification.
Ms. Bay, I think it's because we didn't originally include a budget for a second round of community consultation.
That's correct, Your Worship. It wasn't budgeted for, and it wasn't within the originally contemplated scope of work. Initially, the scope of work was contemplated to provide for the questionnaire type of input that was actually occurred in the spring, and so this is an additional step in the process. And this would be really in the context of the defined parameters set through the negotiation process. So it would have defined some of the physical constraints, be within whatever context of the marina lease agreement in terms of an agreement in principle and within the parameters of the budget that's made available through that lease negotiation process. So we're kind of further along now, and oftentimes one can get more meaningful public input when one knows what those parameters are than when one is asking a general hypothetical question. And so different forms of input are possible at different stages in the process, and we're just that much further along in the process now where a different type of input can be facilitated should council so wish.
Thank you, Ms. Bay.
Yes, I really appreciate the clarification. Thank you. And certainly I support the consultation concept, but I have similar concerns to my other colleagues who have already spoken. So I just have to, I'll wait to hear from others. Thank you.
I see a hand up from Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. First comment is I wonder whether 25 thou is enough. I have a sense we might have to be spending a bit more once this project is fully fleshed out. Would be a first wonder out loud. Second is in terms of the partners or potential participants, I wonder whether the province needs to be included or some element of the province, since we're also dealing with water a lot. I know the leases, we're working on leases and those sorts of things for water lots, but most likely the province may want to be involved in some work that we're doing on Turkey Head and the various other lands as mentioned in the background documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I think the answer would be no on the province. This would be on-land discussions of pieces, so not the water lot discussion portion of it. So I'll leave it there. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The part that concerns me is about under the initiative, it says seek community input. And this is something I spoke about when we talked about our framework for public engagement. It really is who is involved in public engagement. I see it, and we don't really define the community here, but to me it is the stakeholders, and that can be broader than just residents in the community. It can go broader to the general users of the site. It could include consultation with First Nations. It could include consultation with community association groups. So by putting community input doesn't really, we don't have a policy that defines what that looks like within the framework of public engagement. So I see it being broader than residents of Oak Bay.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think that's a, go ahead, Councillor, go ahead, Ms. Bay.
Your Worship, I just wanted to identify that under the partners section of that initiative background, it does provide a list of potential participants, which includes, I think, just about all of those groups that were just mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bay. I don't see any other hands up on this one. I think there's some general agreement that if where that's possible, we want to spend money to get the best possible outcome on this one. I just think it's worth just noting the RFP process, as mentioned by Councillor Ney, wishing to change that. I just want to just acknowledge, though, that this has been a council-led process for the piece of it. So, and I think really has followed. You can always consider aspects of things, but I just don't want to have it come across in any way that this wasn't council-driven and led and directed. And I think we all really appreciate all the work that staff has done to enact what council has directed in a way that has moved it forward as much as possible in this process. So I just throw that out there. That concludes our list of things in the things, but there's a couple of pieces that came up in the course of this discussion. One, at least, and that was just the idea of contemplating, can we look at how our street level solid waste is managed? That would be compost, recycling, garbage, and is there a way of in the course of looking at that of the whole management of the garbage and frequency of pickup? It's a big question that we can't answer here today, but Mr. Haran, is there any way that we could have this looked at and through a body and earmark some money in the budget to at least to allow some staff some time, if that's the will of council, to direct that a subsequent sort of summary report, much like we have on these, could come back for our budgeting process?
Yes, Your Worship, it's possible. It's a new question, so I haven't quite had a chance to wrap my head around what it might look like. There is a current task resolution that council has directed staff to come back with a report talking about solid waste levels of service related to the Elgin Street yard. So if there was additional questions around how we deal with solid waste in terms of public garbage, it's certainly a task that could be done. The challenging part is timelines, trying to figure out how it fits into the work plan and when we could realistically organize ourselves to be able to deliver on that.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. I guess I don't want to delve into the details of it here today. It's not fair to staff, but I think it's a worthy discussion if that's work going on at Elgin. I'm just thinking if it's council's will, but I saw lots of nodding heads when Councillor Ney was speaking on it, and it's certainly been discussed at this table multiple times over the years. So I'm just going to give an appropriate motion of that. So if that work at Elgin is going on, would a motion maybe to bring back options to expand the work on solid waste at Elgin to include street level pickup be brought forward as an option, and then we'd have some costs attached to that change of scope of that ongoing project? Would that maybe be a reasonable way of looking at it?
Your Worship, I think that's a start. I just want to make sure that it's clear, though, when we say street level pickup, what we're really, if the council could clarify more what we're talking about, and so to be able to go off and answer that question. It's not quite clear in my mind what the question is, what the council's asking at the moment.
Fair enough. So I'll say it out loud, and I'll see if Councillor Ney is agreeing with what I heard, which was the in parks on the street where we currently have straight garbage receptacles. Can we look at options for garbage recycling and compost separation to reduce the amount of waste going into the landfill as part of our solid waste planning? Is that clear?
Yes, Your Worship, it's clear. And then hearing the question in that respect, before proceeding in terms of even just directing us to look at that as an option, I would just like to say, I recall we've discussed this at the council table before, but even just that ask, I just would like to point out that it will require changes in FTEs, for example, permanent changes, because of the idea that residents, unfortunately, or people in general, don't necessarily follow, don't care necessarily if a bin says garbage or recycling. Some people are very conscientious, but others just dump whatever they want to into whatever bins, is what we've learned from places like the city of Victoria. So that means that as these bins are emptied with a different vehicle than we currently have, all that stuff needs to be sorted by municipal staff. So there needs to be a place for that sorting to occur, and there needs to be people to do the sorting. So it's not to say that we can't do it or we can't look at it. I just want to be clear from the information I know from the beginning that it is not a straightforward task in terms of resources and level of effort. It's not a simple thing like just changing the bins. There's a lot more behind the scenes that would have to go on to facilitate being able to achieve this outcome in the district.
Thank you for that, Mr. Horan. I think from that, maybe following the same process we've used on other things, the direction may be to just bring back a report on some of those constraints and options, and that would lead to a subsequent potential direction on pieces, but I'll leave it to council on that. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, just on that note, I think also there was a concern about the size of receptacles. Currently, they're quite small comparatively, and so overflow happens quite often. So I'm just wondering if we can perhaps add that as part of it. And I think we're more conscious and aware of it now because of I've noticed so many masks that are discarded on sidewalks and on streets. It's unbelievable. And that's just in Oak Bay. I just find it amazing and also appalling. But so, you know, I think the whole waste management effort is certainly enhanced by a pandemic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that's one thing just that I'll come back to in terms of motions at the end. And the other one was just, I got this in not too late, and my apologies on this one, but I just think there may be some desire to have a look in this coming year at finding at least a temporary off-leash dog area that we could turn on just because of all of the pressure with dogs off of beaches and applying a lot of pressure to our natural spaces. But of course, we block off lots of Uplands Park and places. So I just think it might be worth just getting a report back at least on options for a temporary off-leash dog area. So that's the other one I just wanted to raise the idea of. Councillor Appleton and then Braithwaite.
I would happily make a motion to that effect, Your Worship, to direct staff to bring forward a options analysis for a potential temporary off-leash dog park.
I'll second.
Go ahead, Councillor do I have anything to add, Councillor Appleton?
No, just to say that I concur 100%, Your Worship, and that it's clear that clarifying the rules and regulations around popular dog locations like Willows Beach has definitely, I think we need to face up to the reality that it is displacing dog owners to other locations. We've lost the UVic dog park, which is a pretty well appreciated facility, so I think it is incumbent on us to look at options in short order. Thank you.
And yeah, and just adding on that, I mean, I was on Willows Beach on Sunday, and there was a lot of dogs on the beach, and happily a lot of them were leashed, but a lot of them were not. And people are, I talked to a few people to thank them for leashing their dog, and we had good conversations around the need for exactly what you're talking about. So I'm very happy to support this.
So the motion right now is just to bring back a report on options. So no timeline attached to that, but assuming in reasonable time frame. So just to be very similar to any motion, not really related to priorities as much, but I think it'll come back to a budget issue in the fall. In a month or two time. So okay, so that's the motion on the floor. Any discussion on that? Go ahead. I have Councillor Zelka, but I also have Ms. Varela. So I just want to hear from our CAO first before I go to Councillor Zelka. Go ahead, Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as we all know, that is no small task that Council is highlighting as importance. And I think this is a really good example of a great community initiative that Council wishes to prioritize that has to be considered in the context of department workloads. So even to do an options analysis, whether it's on recycling, whether it's on dogs, those in and of themselves are significant pieces of work within work plans that are already fully allocated. So as a leadership team, we will take those away and bring you back a discussion about possibilities for timing, potential consultants, those sorts of things. But again, when we talk about just an options analysis, those are significant pieces of work. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, and just so I understand, when you're speaking of options analysis, you'll be coming back with these are sort of the costs for consultants to undertake the work or to undertake the study portion of that. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, and that has to be considered within procurement. If we're putting out an RFP, they're large scope. So again, I can come back to Council with those. I just don't want to set up false expectations.
No, fair enough. I think for the most part, we're trying to keep this in the context of the budgeting process. If there's needs for dollars allocated, we just want to make sure that there's some chance for Council to consider that cost within the budgeting process. So thank you for that clarification. Councillor Zelka and then Braithwaite.
Yes, very briefly, since we're running out of time, I would hope that this report, assuming it gets funded, will consider the Harrow Road pump station lands as a possibility for an off-leash dog area. Thank you very much, since we do control those lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Braithwaite and then Green.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thank staff for always being able to help us with what we do sitting around this table. And I understand, Ms. Varela, that it is saying that there's a capacity issue. I find it hard sometimes in that there's certain things that we might want to have done around this table, and I wonder how we make sure that there's space within staff's time to be able to accomplish those things. And this is probably not the time to talk about it, but it's a little bit frustrating sometimes for us sitting on this side of the table to say we would like this looked at or this looked at, and then knowing that it's going to be a hardship on staff to accomplish that. I mean, that makes it difficult for us to ever really ask for anything. So I think so. I don't want to put too much on staff's plate, but I also want to be able to have the capacity to be able to ask for things throughout the year that might come up. That might be something that we haven't thought about today. But we might think about in 6 months and go, gosh, wouldn't it be great to be able to do this? So I wonder, I guess maybe Ms. Varela might want to touch on what the capacity in that regard is.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I'm going to go to Ms. Varela and then back to Councillor Green. Go ahead, Ms. Varela. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds here because we do have limited time, but please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand this can be a challenge for councils. I think one of the things is that we do multi-year work plans. And so, for example, the dog issue is slated for 2023 within our existing work plans. So when we're looking at multi-year funding programs or multi-year work plans within council's priorities, council can absolutely add things on and take things off. I think it's just that willingness to have the dialogue about what does council want prioritized, because we can't do all things with a limited staff capacity. But I think if we can all acknowledge you have X number of hours in each department, and then is the work plan realistic within that? If council chooses to build us out from year to year without leaving room for those initiatives, that restricts our ability more to respond. So again, it's basically a dialogue that we get to have with council, and this is exactly the time to be doing it. Certainly if council wants to add a strategic initiative such as looking at dogs or recycling or those things, those are big pieces in a work plan that's already built out significantly in 2022, but council always retains the right to add more things as long as we take something off, recognizing there is a finite capacity. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. And I think probably the problem here is that it's hard to get into the nuances of some of those things with where there's the total hours, but there's also available hours within different departments and things like that that need some time and space to have a look at. So go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you. And just to add to the comments of my colleague, Councillor Braithwaite, I share some of that frustration, and I do understand that staff have a capacity issue, and the glass is very full. But I think one of the topics I would like to talk about eventually, and we may not tonight, obviously, we're running out of time, but I would like to talk about how we might be able to create work plans that can shift and bend and flex with some needs that come forward that we may not have known about 3 years ago. And after all, at the end of the day, it is about what matters to the community. And sometimes we don't know that at the beginning of a term, so, fully. And this particular term has suffered so much because we haven't had the ability to engage in person with our community. We haven't had audience in our chambers. So it's been a tough 2 years, sorry, it feels like more like 4. It's been a tough 2 years. So I sense and understand and appreciate the frustration on both sides, but I think I've always believed local government at the end of the day, because it's so close to its community, is about possibilities. And maybe that's something we have to talk about, and maybe...
Okay, I'm going to cut you off here because I just need to procedurally get through our meeting. But also, I want to acknowledge here, we've made significant strides to add strategic planning to a budgeting process, so we're not just making a laundry list of wishes that never get funded. And that change has been quite fundamental this term, and it causes these other things to bump up against it, because now we have to actually deal with those realities. You've also made giant leaps in terms of actually adding work plans to these things, so we actually know how much time it takes, and those have now sort of brought home the reality of some of those asks. And so I do acknowledge the great work of council and staff on this. It is a work in progress, and I think these kind of the friction and the kind of the frustrations is normal as we go through this, and I just appreciate the ability to have an honest discussion about how we move those things pieces and build some of that wiggle room into our work plans and into our priorities. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, I appreciate everyone's comments. I'm going to throw one other piece out here that is not, I don't see it on any of these items. The federal and provincial legislation changed around accessibility, and I don't see that referenced in any of the documents. And so hopefully that is something that staff will bring forward in the future.
Yeah, we can maybe come to that. I don't think that's something necessary here. At the end of the day, staff are obligated to keep us in line with all those regulations, so it's not a work plan that's definitely not a governance piece, that is definitely a staff piece. I'm gonna go through here procedurally, certainly the easy ones first, and then we'll go through the line items. We have, just to move that we received the report, moved, seconded. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? The priorities, the 5 key priorities, that those be reaffirmed, moved, seconded. Does I see a seconder? Yes. Any discussion? Councillor Zelka?
Yeah, so the same comment as last year. They're always in the same order, implying that the first one is the highest priority. And I just wanted to make it very clear that these are not in any particular priority or order, I should say, and that they all have the same priority. I just want to confirm that is staff's understanding as well.
That is just understood by all of us, and it never hurts to just reaffirm that every year, Councillor Zelka, so thank you for that. So that motion is on the floor. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And the further new initiatives supported by council to deliver further on big solar by staff implications with the draft 5-year financial planning process. That's these ones, all right, A through J. So I'm going to go through them. I think they're pretty straightforward based on the conversations I've heard here. So I think if we have a motion to move forward item A at the amount, moved and seconded. Any other discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Energy plan, moved and seconded. And I think can we just have
a desire to split this in two, as I mentioned during the discussion, as I brought this.
Yep, I have that note here. So I'm going to ask. I think the motion here would be to move that forward with the funding source from surplus, if possible. Is that the intention here? Okay. And you wish to split this, Councillor Zelka, into 2 components. One would be for internal, and one would be for community.
In essence, yes. In the paragraph in the description, I talked about one part dealing with emissions that are community-based and others that are within municipal operations. And I'd like to have it basically with 2 separate initiatives. Essentially, one, as we know, would be handled most likely by the facilities manager. The other one would be handled by some other method. I have no idea how.
So, Councillor Zelka, can I just ask the question here, or maybe I'll put it through to staff. If it goes through just as it is with that sort of understanding that those are pieces, will the report coming back on this allow for that option in budgeting process, or should we separate it here into those 2 components?
I'd like to see it separated here and now, so that the engineering and facilities can go off and do their piece, and then some undefined community-facing process, maybe through a community climate action task force, can take the second process. But the second process, as community-facing, is going to be incredibly difficult, and most likely will be incredibly expensive.
Okay.
But the district-owned pieces should be straightforward, just like they've been for the last 10 years.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. So the motion, I'm taking the motion to split this into 2 discrete components. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there discussion on that? I don't see any, so I'm happy to call the question. All those in favor of splitting them? That carries unanimously, so they're now two separate pieces, but we can still make this motion to go forward together so that both of those options would come forward, but discreetly to the budget process. Okay, so, yep, I'm getting a waving at the time. I'm going to call the question then on the main motion, which is to have this come back to the budget process, but in two discrete portions. All in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Can I get a motion to extend us for another 10 minutes? My apologies. 10, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you for that indulgence. And then we move on to the operational of deer management. Is there a mover for that? Moved, seconded. Any other discussion on that item? We've had a piece. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor Braithwaite opposed. That moves forward. We move on to enhanced washroom cleaning and garbage pickup and pieces. Moved and seconded. Discussion, I think we've had a fair bit. Anything anybody wishes to add? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We have Building First Nations Relations monies. Moved, seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. We have identify how to increase capital output 3 to 5 times. Moved and seconded. Any other discussion on that? I'm very curious to see what this is going to come back looking like because I know it's not an easy task. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. And expanded active transportation. And again, I'm just going to raise the point here of can we separate these two so that we can perhaps move the timeline up if possible, just I have a motion to kind of cover the first portion of this under the current piece. Go ahead,
Your Worship, I would make a motion that, if possible, the first phase of the initiative be covered by surplus if available.
Thank you for that. Now, I just want to make sure that that's in order. So, because we are nearing the end of this year, and I don't think the work's probably going to start this year. So, is that still okay to move it, Mr. Haran? Or is it a question for Mr. Payne?
Yes, Your Worship. The timelines around this one are not necessarily, so it does allow us to start earlier. And I'll let Mr. Payne weigh in terms of the impacts in terms of financial side of things. But in terms of delivery of the project, I think that we still need to keep the Q3 2022 timeline in there as part of the commitment that we're able to deliver on.
Understood. I think, but yeah, thank you for that. Mr. Payne, does that motion make sense, or do you have any concerns about the motion to fund that phase 1 out of surplus?
Your Worship, no concerns, thank you.
Okay, so the motion right now then is to move this forward with the phase 1 coming out of this year's surplus. Okay, any other discussion on that item? I believe I had a second. I think there's multiple seconders for that. And Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be voting against this as the initiative appears to be focused on pouring concrete, and I would be hoping that we would take an initiative, or we would look at more innovative ways of dealing with this particular issue.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor and opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. Thank you. And I do appreciate it's always good if people are voting against to just articulate why. I think it's always very helpful for those watching to understand and for us to hear the arguments in that case. So thank you for that. We have natural assets. Again, funding out of surplus, moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? We have sidewalk patios, moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this? I guess it sounds like this will go forward, and I'm supportive of it in principle, but I guess I just like the details of this one matter to me in terms of how it's going to be how that money is going to be spent, because I'd like it to be sort of put towards the long-term piece of this, not just temporary. So any other discussion? We're on number I, which is assess, regulate permit sidewalk patios. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? And then the consultation dollars for ongoing consultation at Turkey Head, moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Opposed to this, primarily just, and this has, you're quite right to clarify, Mr. Mayor, this has been a council decision all along as we've been moving forward, but my reason is that I feel the consultation should have been done before the RFP was issued.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be voting in favor, but I'm assuming that the estimated cost is low, so I'll be fine to approve more funds for this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Oh, sorry, Councillor Nay. Sorry, Councillor Nay. You just said that. I am just moving a little too quickly for my own good. So the other ones that came up in this, I think the accessibility question is not necessary for our motion. We have the sort of questions around the broader question of solid waste and the possibility of a short-term dog off-leash area. I don't want to add considerably to staff workload, but I think we need some understanding of what that, even at a very high level, what the impact of even coming up with those numbers would look like to come back. So I'm just going to seek some advice here on wording to make sure that we're not directing a massive amount of staff workload, but enough to come back with some general sense of what this would look like from a staff workload perspective to look at it more fulsomely and possibly add it to the budget. So, Ms. Williams, do you have any advice on this one in terms of, or Ms. Bay, I'll go to either one of you in terms of some wording. I have the feeling that council would still like to at least not let it drop, but have it added in here. It's just we have some sense of where it would land in terms of staff impact. And I might go to Ms. Varela if that's necessary. Go ahead, Ms. Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think if council simply directed staff to come back with a report or in some way report back with how that could be contemplated. I think we need to coordinate internally as to how that's best done when we're all in the room. But I think certainly we hear council's direction that you're wanting to know how this can be done, and I think we can at least commit to coming back before budget on the how one would look at this. I think we probably can't come back with the full options analysis before the vote, but we can certainly report back on what the implications would be of getting you that.
Okay, I think so. A motion just to bring back a report on how both dog off leash and temporary dog off leash area and solid waste management could be tackled. Then in that general term. So moved.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Thank you for that direction, Ms. Bay. It's always good to keep things very general at these kind of things, especially at this time of night. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, and just as part of that, since we are going to have enhanced garbage pickup, it would be nice to know what exactly our program is for replacement of containers that are obsolete or damaged or otherwise need to be replaced, because I hope we are not going to be making those decisions at the council table all the time. So, but it could be included in the report. Thank you.
I don't think we want that in the report. I think that's just adding too much into that report. We just need a little understanding of what would be required to come back with some options. Essentially, is what we're looking for. So thank you for that. So that motion's. Did I call the question on that already? I've lost track of my no. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Oh, Councillor Nay.
Mr. Mayor, I've just been advised that on the vote we made on item J, where I voted against, I didn't support it, that I didn't have my mic on, and so my comments for against were not audible then.
Do you wish to repeat them?
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I voted, I did not vote in favor of the consultation on Spuhung design. And my reasons stated were that, in my view, the consultation with First Nations should have been done before the development of the RFP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm just going through my little pieces here. We have a notice of motion, Councillor Appleton. Are you amenable to moving us to another? I'm just looking at our time here, where I need to either extend the time or refer this to the next meeting.
I appreciate that, Your Worship. There is some significance to having this arrive on this day, so I think if I could beg Council's indulgence for another couple of minutes, I would really appreciate being able to get this through. Thank you. But I will take the direction of Council.
Well, I need a motion to. The meeting ends in 30 seconds unless there's unanimous agreement to extend the meeting beyond 10:40. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
I will make the motion to extend.
For how long?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Councillor Zelka, you wish to speak to the motion to extend? 5 minutes, is that what you're indicating? Okay, 5 minutes.
I'll give you 5 minutes.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate this extra time. Thank you to my colleagues. And very happy to be speaking to this on Snow Wyeth Day and spreading good energy through this notice of motion. I do have one small amendment to the motion to ask staff to provide resource implications for the review into the 2022 budget process. So that I don't think that substantively changes the motion. So.
Can you just repeat that, the change?
Just wanted to amend to add to the motion that the resource requirements for the review be included in the 2022 budget process.
Okay, so it's not directing staff to do the work, it's just asking for the
Basically,
cost?
that the work that is implied in the motion, if resources are required, that those be included by staff in the 2022 budget.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. So that's motions live.
Well, shall I read the whereas clauses, Your Worship?
I think as they're in here and we have time limitations, we're probably okay to move it forward as the piece.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, so the motion's live. Anything else that you do wish to add? You don't?
Just very briefly, Your Worship, I will acknowledge and appreciate the work of the Heritage Foundation, the members of the Heritage Foundation who identified this as a significant element and encouraged moving it forward and are in fact doing some work on their own recognizance to move this forward. This was something included by Council in the place naming component was one of our specific items identified as part of reconciliation, and not only do we want to look at future forms of recognition, but also to look at what's already in place in the community and how we can improve that and make that better to contribute to reconciliation. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I have Councillor Zelka and then Patterson.
Yeah, very quickly. I just want to confirm, this is asking staff to bring back a report, or is it asking staff to do the work? I'm unclear.
The motion is to direct staff to do the work at this point.
To do the work?
Yes.
As opposed to council having any input on what the changes would be?
Correct at this point.
Then I'll have to vote against, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And while I appreciate certainly the spirit that this is brought forward in, I do have concerns about it. I believe, yes, our Heritage Foundation are well suited to identify and document a review of all monuments and plaques in the district. So that portion I'm fine with. However, I don't think that providing the authority that our Heritage Foundation, without having any discussion with Indigenous peoples, that they are the right body or even staff to identify whether the language is appropriate and respectful. I think that would require input from First Nations. So I think the step is coming early in the relationship building. So I really think that we need to establish the relationship with First Nations to carry this forward, other than identifying the number of monuments and what they say. And with the Walbrand Park portion of it, I don't know what the timeline is on that, but again, I don't think it's appropriate to move this forward at this council now without having first engaged in at least preliminary discussions with First Nations. So I can't support it as it is.
So I'm just looking at the time here. I think this needs a little time just to kind of work out some of these nuances. But I mean, our meeting ends in 30 seconds if we don't extend it again. And I think, I will say in my notes here, I thought, they needed some wording there about to include guidance from local knowledge, Indigenous knowledge keepers or something along those lines. And I think it's a nuance that we just need to have a bit of time to get to, Councillor Appleton. So I'm just wondering if you're okay to refer this to we're going to end here. I would need a motion to extend for another minute or two if we wish to. 2 minutes. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed?
Opposed.
You're
I'm
opposed? Okay, fair enough, Councillor Zelka. Under our procedures bylaw, if someone opposes, does that end our meeting, or is it a 2/3 majority?
To extend is unanimous consent.
Okay.
So if it's been opposed, then the meeting adjourns.
We are now adjourned. So by default, just so we're all clear on the process here, this is not dead in the water. As it's a live motion or at the time of the meeting, does it get referred automatically to the next council meeting, Ms. Williams?
Yes, Your Worship. We'll ensure that it's on the next agenda, which is Monday night.
Great, thank you very much. And I would just maybe ask, in the interest of time saving, if people have thoughts on ways that the motion could be amended to address any of the concerns raised in the short time we had here, then we can maybe forward those to Councillor Appleton for those for consideration, so that we move this along a bit more expediently, less time. And I apologize that we ran out of time on this, Councillor Appleton, but with that, we are fully adjourned, and so no motion to adjourn is required, and we will see you. Do we have any other meetings this week? I'm trying to think now. It seems like every week we have multiple meetings, but I think this week we don't.
No, Your Worship, the next meeting is on the 29th.
Okay, next meeting is the 29th. Look forward to seeing everybody then. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next Monday.